They thought he was just the driver, a quiet man in a pressed white shirt, hands resting steady on the wheel, eyes fixed somewhere ahead of traffic. Nobody asked his name during the first week. Nobody remembered his face. And that was exactly where they went wrong, because on the morning two black SUVs blocked both ends of a deserted mountain road when $1 million security team vanished without a single radio call, when the youngest CEO in the company's history pressed her back against the leather seat and couldn't breathe. The only thing standing between her and whatever came next wasn't a tactical unit, wasn't federal backup, wasn't the people she'd spent years trusting. It was Nathan Carter, the driver. Hit like. Drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And stay with me all the way to the end, because nothing about this man is what it looks like. The interview was scheduled for 9 in the morning, but Nathan Carter arrived at 8:15. Not to impress anyone. He just liked to see a place before the place had a chance to see him back, a habit so old he'd stopped noticing he had it. He sat in his own car in the parking structure across the street from Sterling Meridian Corporation's headquarters and looked at the building for close to 40 minutes. 43 floors of glass and brushed steel rising above the Chicago skyline. The kind of architecture that was designed to make you feel small before you even walk through the front door. He noticed the security cameras on the exterior, 4 visible, 2 partially hidden behind decorative concrete fixtures on the second floor overhang. He noticed the rotating guard at the main entrance changed every 30 minutes rather than every hour, which was unusual. He noticed that the loading dock on the south side had a camera with a blind spot large enough to park a van in. He noticed all of this the way other people noticed weather, automatically, without deciding to. Nathan was 32 years old. He had a daughter named Lily, who was 6, and currently obsessed with a television program about a girl who trained dolphins. And he had a 1-bedroom apartment in Pilsen with a radiator that knocked every night at 2 a.m. He had a 2009 Honda Accord that he kept in good mechanical condition because he understood engines and because he couldn't afford anything else. He had a Navy dress uniform in a box in the back of the closet that he hadn't opened since the funeral. He did not have a wife anymore. He was still working on understanding what that meant for the rest of his life. The position he was applying for was executive chauffeur, posted through a private staffing agency with a vague listing that mentioned high-profile transportation needs and discretion required. The pay was almost 3 times what he'd been making doing security consultation work for small businesses, the kind of work that paid just enough to keep Lily in her school and him in the apartment. He needed the money. That was the honest reason he was here. He wasn't going to dress it up. He checked his tie in the rearview mirror, decided it looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago, and got out of the car. The lobby of Sterling Meridian was the kind of space that hummed, not loudly, just a low, expensive frequency, the sound of money being very comfortable with itself. The floors were dark marble. The reception desk was a sweeping arc of white stone staffed by 2 women who both looked like they had never once in their lives been uncertain about anything. A security guard stood near the elevator bank, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the room with the specific expression of someone who had worked security so long that genuine threat and ordinary Tuesday had become identical to him. Nathan signed in, got a visitor badge, and sat down in the waiting area with 8 other men. He studied them without appearing to study them. The man to his left was wearing a suit that probably cost $2,000, shoes that probably cost another $800, and a watch that cost more than Nathan's car. He was reviewing something on a tablet with the focused energy of a man who had been impressive his entire life and expected to continue being impressive. The man 2 seats down was younger, maybe 27, aggressively relaxed in the way that people who are nervous sometimes become, legs spread wide, chin up, scrolling his phone with the practiced casualness of someone who wanted the room to know he wasn't worried. There was another man near the window who Nathan recognized from somewhere, took him a moment, then he placed it. Former Secret Service. The posture was unmistakable. The way the man's eyes moved across the room in a steady, methodical pattern without his head moving was something you couldn't fake and couldn't teach quickly. Nathan looked at his own hands for a moment. Then he looked back at the room. A woman in a crisp blazer appeared from a hallway and called the first name. The man in the expensive suit stood up and followed her without acknowledging anyone else in the room. Nathan settled back in his chair and waited. He was called fourth. The woman led him down a hallway lined with framed photographs. Sterling Meridian's History and Images, the company's founder in the 1970s, various milestones, various buildings, various handshakes between men in suits. At the end of the hall was a conference room with a glass wall overlooking the city. Inside were two people, a man in his mid-50s named Robert Hale, according to the nameplate on the table, who was head of executive operations, and a woman who was not sitting behind the table but instead standing near the window with her arms crossed and a coffee cup in one hand, looking out at the skyline. She turned when Nathan came in, and he understood immediately that she was the one running this interview, even though the nameplate was in front of the other man. Amelia Sterling was 30 years old and looked like she had spent most of those 30 years being underestimated by people who later regretted it. She was not particularly tall, not particularly intimidating in any obvious way. Medium height, dark hair pulled back, wearing a charcoal blazer over a simple white blouse. What she had was attention, the kind that landed on you with weight. She looked at Nathan the way someone looks at a problem they are genuinely interested in solving, not with warmth exactly, but with a specific quality of focus that he recognized. He'd known people like that. Most of them had been very good at their jobs in conditions where being bad at your job got people killed. "Nathan Carter," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced at his resume on the table, though he had a feeling she'd already read it. 12 years in the Navy, honorable discharge 18 months ago. Before that, some kind of specialized operations work, though the details are conveniently thin. She looked up. "Why the chauffeur position?" "The hours work with my daughter's school schedule," he said, "and I'm good at driving." Hale wrote something down. Amelia kept looking at Nathan. "Everyone says they're good at driving," she said. "Most people are," Nathan said. "I didn't say I was good at driving. I said I'm good at this specific kind of driving, which is different." Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not impressed, more like interested, the way a person gets interested when they've been asking a boring question for 3 hours and someone finally gives them a different kind of answer. "What's the difference?" she asked. "Road analysis, environmental awareness, understanding that your job isn't to get someone from point A to point B, it's to get them there in a way that accounts for everything that could go wrong between A and B and most of the things that can't be anticipated. It's threat assessment done at 40 miles an hour while maintaining a conversation that puts the passenger at ease." He paused. "And mechanical familiarity with the vehicle you're operating. You'd be surprised how many people skip that part." Hale was writing faster now. Amelia had uncrossed her arms. "Mechanical familiarity," she repeated. "A vehicle is only as reliable as the person responsible for knowing it," Nathan said. "I don't drive anything I haven't inspected myself." There was a pause. Then Amelia set her coffee cup down on the credenza behind her and said, "Come with me." The limousine was parked in the company's private underground garage. A black Mercedes-Benz S-Class Stretch, current year, polished to a finish that reflected the fluorescent ceiling lights in long curved lines. It was a beautiful vehicle. It had also been sitting in this garage for 3 days without being driven, according to the maintenance tag clipped to the driver's side mirror. 3 other candidates had been brought down here before Nathan. He knew because he'd counted the visitor badges at the security desk when he came through. 4 had been issued for the morning session, and his was number 4. 2 of the previous candidates, according to what Nathan could infer from the slight tension in Hale's expression when they arrived at the garage, had simply gotten in and demonstrated their driving. One had presumably done something else. He didn't know what. He walked around the car first. The full exterior took him about 2 minutes. He crouched near the rear wheel wells, checked the tire sidewalls, looked underneath along the chassis, using the small flashlight he kept on his keychain. Another habit, like arriving early. Then he opened the hood and spent 3 minutes there, which he could feel Amelia watching with an expression he couldn't read from this angle. He found it on the brake line, not a full cut, nothing so obvious. A partial abrasion, the kind that could happen naturally over time if a line was routed improperly and rubbed against a bracket. Except this line was routed correctly, which meant the abrasion had been put there deliberately. At current brake fluid levels, the system would work fine. At speed on a highway, with sustained brake application, a long downhill ramp, an exit deceleration, the line would fail. Not immediately, but it would fail. Nathan straightened up, closed the hood, and turned around. Amelia was watching him with an expression that had changed significantly from the conference room. "I won't drive this vehicle," Nathan said. Hale stiffened. "Excuse me?" "There's a partial abrasion on the rear left brake line. It's not accidental." Nathan looked at Amelia, not Hale. "Someone either did it deliberately or this car hasn't been properly maintained. Either way, I won't put a passenger in it." There was a long silence. Hale opened his mouth and closed it again. "Show me," Amelia said quietly. He showed her. She spent a long time looking at what he'd found, long enough that he understood she wasn't performing consideration. She was actually thinking. She straightened up eventually, and when she looked at him, her expression had settled into something flat and certain. "The other 3 candidates," she said. "What do you think they did?" "2 of them got in and drove the car around the garage," Nathan said. "I don't know about the third." The third popped the hood for about 30 seconds and said everything looked fine. She said it without visible emotion. "How did you know to look at the brake line specifically?" "I didn't. I looked at everything." She nodded slowly, then she looked at Hale in a way that communicated something Nathan wasn't meant to interpret, and turned back to Nathan. "The position pays $92,000 a year with full benefits," she said. "You start Monday." Nathan had been prepared to negotiate. He'd been prepared for a second interview, a background check delay, a week of uncertainty. He was not prepared for this, and something in his expression must have shown it because, for the first time since he'd walked into the building, Amelia Sterling almost smiled. "You found what a full maintenance team missed," she said simply. "Either they're incompetent or they're compromised. I don't particularly want to figure out which one while I'm in the car." He told Lily about the new job over dinner that night. She was eating macaroni and cheese, the kind from the box, the only kind she would accept. And she received the news with the specific gravity of a 6-year-old processing information that mattered. "Are you going to drive a big car?" she asked. "Pretty big." "Like a bus?" "No, more like a very long, regular car." She considered this. "Does it have a TV in it?" "Probably." "Can I ride in it?" "No, baby." "Why not?" "Because it belongs to someone else." She seemed to accept this, though she held a grudge about it that expressed itself in a pointed silence for approximately 90 seconds before she asked if she could have more macaroni. He gave her more macaroni. He sat across from her and watched her eat, and thought about the brake line and about the way the abrasion had been positioned, not on the exterior of the line where it might be noticed during a casual inspection, but on the underside where you had to know what you were looking for. He thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. He sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and his phone and opened the notes application and typed 3 words, "Who maintains the car?" Then he sat in the quiet apartment with the radiator knocking somewhere in the walls and thought about what kind of company needed a driver who wouldn't notice something like that. Monday came with gray October sky and traffic on the 90 that moved like cold syrup. Nathan arrived at the Sterling Meridian garage at 7 a.m. for an 8 a.m. departure. The car had been replaced, same model, different vehicle, fresh maintenance tag. He inspected it anyway. 40 minutes. Every accessible component. He found nothing wrong, which told him either the problem had been isolated or someone had been more careful this time, and he filed both possibilities away without deciding between them. At 7:58, Amelia came through the garage door from the elevator with a leather portfolio under one arm, her phone in her other hand, and the expression of someone who had already been working for 4 hours. 2 security personnel came with her, a large man named Garrett who wore his earpiece like he'd been born with it, and a woman named Diaz who moved in a particular way that Nathan recognized and respected. Amelia saw Nathan standing beside the car and stopped. "You inspected it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "How long?" 40 minutes. She looked at him for a moment. "You know most people would find that excessive." "I know." "I don't find it excessive," she said, and got in the car. The first 3 days were entirely ordinary, which, in Nathan's experience, was its own kind of information. Ordinary could mean nothing was wrong. It could also mean that nothing wrong had been allowed to be visible yet. He drove Amelia to meetings in the Loop, to a lunch with investors in River North, to a late session at a law firm in the West Loop that ended at 9:30 on Wednesday night. He was quiet in the way that good drivers are quiet, present enough to be useful, invisible enough not to be noticed. He kept the divider up unless she lowered it. He took the routes he had pre-mapped every morning using 3 different traffic applications cross-referenced against his own assessment of road conditions. On Thursday afternoon, something changed. He was pulling out of the parking structure at the law firm, same building as Wednesday, different meeting, when he noticed a black Chevrolet Suburban 3 cars back. Illinois plates. It held position through 2 lane changes and a yellow light that Nathan deliberately slowed through, testing. It held position. He said nothing. He cataloged it. The Suburban was there again Friday morning, 2 blocks from Sterling Meridian, parked facing the wrong direction for street parking on that block. Different driver, or at least different posture behind the wheel. Same plates. He ran the plates that evening using a contact from his previous consulting work, a former NCIS investigator named Paula, who now did freelance background work and owed him a favor from a case involving a shipping company in Gary 2 years back. Paula came back to him in 2 hours. The plates were registered to a leasing company based in Schaumburg. The leasing company had no online presence. The registered agent at the state level was a name he didn't recognize. The trail ended there, which was itself a kind of answer. He sat in his car outside Lily's after-school program and watched the traffic on Cermak, and thought about how people who follow other people are sometimes professionals and sometimes amateurs, and how the distinction mattered enormously in terms of what they were willing to do. Shunt. The second week brought a route change. It didn't come from him. It came from Garrett, head of security, the large man with the earpiece, delivered as a casual update on Tuesday morning just before departure. We're going up Lake Shore today instead of Michigan. Ms. Sterling's preference. Nathan looked at Garrett for a moment. She told you that? Came through the ops coordinator. What time this morning? Garrett frowned slightly. Does it matter? Probably not, Nathan said and pulled out. He took Lakeshore Drive as instructed. He also took a mental note of every variation from his pre-mapped route and the specific fact that the Suburban was not present today. Not behind them, not ahead, not in any of the positions it had occupied during the previous week. It had moved, or it had been told to move, which meant someone who knew about the route change also knew about the Suburban. Nathan drove with both hands on the wheel and both thoughts in his head and said nothing to anyone. That night he sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything he'd observed in 2 weeks. The brake line, the Suburban and its untraceable plates, the route change that hadn't originated with Amelia, the camera with the blind spot on the south loading dock. The way Garrett's eyes had gone just slightly unfocused when Nathan asked about the timing of the route change. Not evasive exactly, but careful in a way that distinguished itself from how he'd been careful before. He looked at what he had written for a long time. Then he wrote, "The problem is inside." He underlined it twice. He thought about calling someone, Paula again, or a former teammate he still had a number for, a man living in Boise now who did private security consulting and sometimes talked about nothing and sometimes talked about everything. He didn't call either of them. He didn't have enough yet. And in his experience, in a very particular kind of experience that he'd spent 18 months trying to stop thinking about, moving before you had enough was how situations became catastrophic instead of merely difficult. He put Lily to bed, sat on the edge of her mattress until she was asleep, watched her breathe for a while. She was the only person in the world with whom he had no habits to manage. He wasn't strategic around her. He wasn't quiet around her. He was just her father, which sometimes felt like the only true thing about him. He went back to the kitchen and added 2 more lines to the legal pad. Who changed the route? Who told them to? The tracking device was under the rear bumper, magnetically attached to the frame just above the exhaust housing. He found it on Thursday of the 3rd week during his morning inspection, which was why he did morning inspections. It was a commercial-grade GPS unit, not the cheapest you could buy, not the most sophisticated either, the kind of device that fell in the middle category where cost suggested purpose rather than abundance or poverty. It transmitted on a frequency he identified by running a basic RF scan, using an application he'd downloaded the previous week when he started to suspect the car was being monitored. He photographed it with his phone. 3 angles. He did not remove it. He sat in the driver's seat for 3 minutes and thought about what to do next. The options were, tell Amelia, tell Garrett, tell no one, or tell someone outside the company. He thought about each one. Telling Garrett would reveal that he'd found it before he knew whether Garrett's hands were clean. Telling no one was tactically useful, but morally complicated. He was being paid to protect her, and he was concealing a threat. Telling someone outside was correct protocol, but required first knowing who outside could be trusted, which he was not yet certain of. He decided on Amelia, directly, without going through channels. He waited until they were in the car that afternoon, 15 minutes into a crosstown drive, with the divider up, before he lowered it himself. She looked up from her portfolio. "What is it?" "I need 2 minutes of your time," he said, unscheduled. Something in his tone, not alarm, but a register she hadn't heard from him before, made her set the portfolio down. "Pull over." He pulled into a loading zone on Walker, put the hazards on, and turned in his seat. He showed her the photograph on his phone without saying anything first, let her see it and understand what she was looking at. "Is that under my car?" she said. "Yes, ma'am. Rear bumper, driver's side, mounted to the frame. I found it this morning." She was quiet for a moment, not frightened, processing. He'd already noticed that she didn't go to fear first. She went to information. "How long has it been there?" "I can't tell you precisely. I've been inspecting the car every morning for 3 weeks. It wasn't there as of last Thursday. Could have gone on any time between then and this morning." "Who knows about it?" "You and me." She looked at him steadily. "Why didn't you go to Garrett?" He held her gaze. "Because I don't know whether to." The silence that followed was the kind that told him she understood exactly what he meant. She didn't ask him to explain further. She looked out the windshield at the traffic on Wacker for a moment, and he watched something settle in her expression. A kind of clarity that came after someone stopped hoping a problem was smaller than it appeared. "What do you recommend?" she said. "Document it. Leave it in place for now so that whoever placed it doesn't know it's been found. And I need to tell you something else." He told her about the Suburban and the untraceable plates. He told her about the route change that hadn't come from her. He told her about the camera blind spot on the loading dock, which was smaller in itself but significant as part of a pattern. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for several seconds. "You've been running your own parallel operation," she said finally. "I've been doing my job," Nathan said. "I'm responsible for getting you where you're going safely. That's not possible if I don't understand the threat environment." "You haven't said anything for 3 weeks." "I wasn't certain enough. I am now." She studied him in a way she hadn't before. Not the analytical attention of the interview room, but something closer to genuine curiosity about who she was actually dealing with. "Your file says 12 years Navy," she said. "Specialized operations with thin details." "Yes, ma'am." "What kind of specialized?" "The kind I can't specify," he said. She nodded once, slowly. "All right." She picked up her portfolio. "Document everything you have. All of it. I'll arrange a conversation with someone I trust outside the company's security infrastructure. Tonight, if possible." "Yes, ma'am." He checked his mirror, turned off the hazards, and pulled back into traffic. The divider stayed down for the rest of the drive, which was the first time that had happened. The phone call came that night at 11:47. He was in bed but not asleep. He hadn't slept more than 5 or 6 hours at a stretch since leaving the Navy, a condition his doctor called an adjustment, and he called a permanent feature of being who he was now. His phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. He let it ring 3 times, then answered. "Mr. Carter." The voice was male, deliberately modulated, the specific flatness of someone using software to alter their natural tone. "We know about your daughter, Lily, age 6, attends Henderson Elementary, 2240 South Millard, gets out at 3:15. Nathan's body went very still. Not frozen. He'd been trained out of freezing, but still in the way that a man goes still when every other faculty is engaged elsewhere. "Keep the car on its scheduled route Thursday morning," the voice said. "Don't deviate. Don't report this call. If you do either of those things, we'll know." The line went dead. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. He could hear Lily's white noise machine through the wall, that steady, shushing sound she needed to sleep that he'd once found unbearable and now found grounding. He thought about what the call was and what it wasn't. It was a threat calibrated to the most direct point of leverage a person in his position could have. It was a test of whether he would function the way they needed him to function. It was a sign that someone had been watching him long enough to know he had a daughter, her name, her school, her dismissal time, which meant they had been watching for at minimum a week, possibly longer. What it was not was a guarantee of safety. People who made threats did not become less dangerous because you complied. He'd seen enough to know that. Compliance bought time, not protection. He did not panic. He'd been trained in the deep cellular way that training works when it's applied in actual conditions, not to panic when someone threatened the things that mattered most to him. The training didn't eliminate the feeling. It just built a wall around it while his mind worked. He texted Paula, "Need a favor. Low-profile security observation on a minor. Henderson Elementary, Millard Avenue. Starting tomorrow, 1 week minimum. Personal matter. Discretionary." Paula replied in 8 minutes. "Quiet or contact?" "Quiet. Just eyes. Let me know if anything changes." "Understood. You okay?" He thought about how to answer that and settled on working on it. He put the phone down and sat in the dark for another few minutes. Then he got up, checked the lock on the front door, checked the window latches the way he'd done every night for 18 months, looked in on Lily, and went back to bed. He did not change the route Thursday morning, but he also did not keep silent. He documented the call, time, number, content, vocal characteristics, and added it to the file he'd been building. He sent a secure message to Amelia through a communication channel they'd established 2 days earlier, received a threat against personal contact, and proceeding as normal but need to discuss. Tomorrow, in person, outside the building. Her reply came at 12:20 a.m., confirmed 7 a.m. The place on Randolph we discussed. He looked at the message and thought about the fact that she had been awake when it arrived. Something was happening in that company, something that had been building for longer than he'd been there. He could feel the shape of it the way you feel a current before you see the water moving, that faint resistance in the air, the pressure of something large and organized moving just below the surface of the visible. He was one man, in a pressed shirt, driving a car. He was also something else, something he didn't talk about, didn't advertise, barely acknowledge to himself anymore. But he knew what he was capable of. He knew what he'd been made into over 12 years, and multiple theaters of operation in conditions that he still sometimes saw clearly when he closed his eyes in the dark. He thought about Amelia's face when he'd shown her the photograph of the tracking device, the way she hadn't gone to fear, the way she'd gone to, who do I trust? That was the right question. That was the only question. He thought about the board meeting she'd mentioned last week, a major scheduled vote coming up in 11 days. Something significant about a corporate acquisition, something that had made the lawyers she'd been meeting with choose their words with unusual precision. 11 days. He looked at the ceiling of his bedroom and listened to the radiator knock in the walls and thought about a remote mountain road he'd noticed 3 weeks ago while pre-mapping alternative routes through the northwest suburbs. A maintenance checkpoint, abandoned now, sitting above a long curve of empty highway that connected 2 stretches of nothing. He filed it away. Not because he knew he'd need it, but because he'd learned a long time ago that the things you memorized before you needed them were the only things you ever actually had when it mattered. Lily's white noise machine hummed through the wall. He closed his eyes. He didn't sleep much, but for once, that was fine. The coffee at the place on Randolph was bad. The kind of bad that came from beans kept too long in a warm environment and equipment that hadn't been properly cleaned in weeks. Nathan noticed this in the first sip and drank it anyway. He'd had worse. He'd had worse in conditions where bad coffee was the best part of the morning, so the place on Randolph with its sticky countertop and fluorescent lighting that buzzed slightly on the left side of the room was, by comparison, entirely acceptable. Amelia arrived at 7:03. She was in a dark coat, no portfolio today, hair down instead of pulled back, which made her look different enough from her public-facing image that he doubted anyone in the diner would recognize her. She sat across from him in the booth, looked at the coffee he'd ordered for her, and didn't touch it. "Tell me exactly what the voice said," she said. He told her, word for word, which he could do because he'd written it down at 12:30 in the morning and read it 3 times before he went back to bed. She listened without her expression changing much, but he noticed the way her hands, flat on the table when she sat down, slowly closed into loose fists as he talked. When he finished, she said, "They know where your daughter goes to school." "Yes." "That means they've had someone watching you, not just the car, you, your life outside the job." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The diner was mostly empty at this hour. A man at the counter eating eggs, a woman near the window with a laptop, nobody close enough to matter. "You reported it to me instead of following their instruction." "I didn't follow their instruction or ignore it," Nathan said. "I documented it and told you through a channel they don't know about. That's different from both options they gave me." She looked at him steadily. "Most people would have just changed the route. Most people would have just driven the car with the bad brake line, too." Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile. It was more complicated than that. "Fair," she said quietly. Then, "My daughter is being watched, and I'm sitting here asking you about corporate logistics. I want you to know I understand how that sounds." "You're the reason my daughter is being watched," Nathan said, "which means the safest thing for her is for us to figure out what's actually happening here." She absorbed that. "Okay?" She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Actual paper, handwritten, which told him she understood that digital communications had become unreliable in her world. She slid it across the table. "These are the financial irregularities I found last week. I've been working through acquisition documents for the Vantage deal. We're absorbing a mid-sized logistics company, been in process for 8 months. The numbers stopped making sense about 3 weeks ago." He unfolded the paper and looked at it. Numbers, dates, account references written in small, precise handwriting. He was not a forensic accountant, but he'd done enough operational work in environments where money laundering was infrastructure to recognize certain patterns. "You pulled this yourself?" "I didn't give it to finance because I don't know who in finance is clean," she said. "I have an external auditor I trust. She's been looking at it quietly since Friday." "What does she think?" "She thinks approximately $42 million has moved through shell accounts attached to the Vantage acquisition in a way that doesn't correspond to any transaction she can legitimately account for." Amelia paused. "She also thinks it's structured to look like it came from decisions I made personally." Nathan looked up from the paper. "Someone is building a case against me," she said. "Financial misconduct. The kind of thing that would trigger an emergency board review and give them legal grounds to remove me from the CEO position while the investigation ran." She said it flatly, the way someone describes something they've had a few days to get used to being furious about. "The board vote in 9 days isn't just about the acquisition. There's a motion that was added to the agenda without my knowledge 3 weeks ago. I found out about it from my attorney on Saturday." "What kind of motion?" "Temporary suspension of CEO authority pending financial review." She picked up the coffee, looked at it, put it back down. "It would pass. I've spent the last week trying to count votes, and I think it would pass. 3 members of my board have been quietly building relationships with the executives who would benefit most from a change in leadership." Nathan folded the paper carefully and slid it back to her. "Who benefits most?" "Marcus Hale." She said the name the way you say the name of something you've been trying not to name for a while. "Chief Operating Officer. He's been at the company longer than I have. He and my father had a complicated relationship, and when I took over 18 months ago, he made certain accommodations that I think he's spent every day since resenting." She paused. "And 2 board members, Philip Strand and Connie Whitmore. They've been aligned with Hale for at least a year based on communication records my attorney subpoenaed last week." "Is the Marcus Hale related to the Robert Hale who sat in on my interview?" She looked at him. "His brother. Robert is head of executive operations. Marcus is COO." Nathan was quiet for a moment. He thought about Robert Hale writing things down during the interview, the pace of it, the specific moments he'd written things. He thought about how a man who ran executive operations would have access to vehicle maintenance scheduling, security, personnel assignments, and route coordination. "The route change that didn't come from you," he said. "Went through Robert's office," she said. "I know. I checked after you told me. Does Robert know what his brother is doing?" "I don't know. I genuinely don't know." She looked out the window at Randolph Street. "That's what makes this hard. I don't know how deep it goes, and I don't know how much of what I think I know is actually real." She said the last part with a tiredness that was different from her usual quality of focus, something underneath the composure that had been worn thinner than she wanted to show. "When did you last sleep?" Nathan asked. She looked at him like she'd momentarily forgotten he was a person who might ask that. "Thursday," she said. "More than 2 hours at a stretch, I mean." "You need to sleep." "I'm aware. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because you're about to go into 9 days that will require you to be operationally precise, and people who don't sleep make mistakes in ways they can't see from the inside." She looked at him for a long moment. "You talk like someone who's run operations before." "I've driven long routes before," he said. She didn't push it, but he could see her filing something away, the same way he filed things. "What do I do about the tracking device?" she asked. "Leave it. We know it's there. That's an advantage as long as they don't know we know. They told you not to deviate from the route Thursday. That's 3 days from now." "Yes." "What happens if you do deviate?" "They'll know, and they'll escalate." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "But there's something I want to test Thursday that requires a deviation." "What kind of test?" "I want to see who moves when the car moves unexpectedly. If someone in the security team or in operations is feeding information about routes to whoever is following us, an unscheduled deviation should produce a specific reaction. Someone will make contact, adjust position, communicate." She considered this. "And if they make good on the threat against your daughter?" "I have someone watching her school as of this morning," he said. "Quiet surveillance. If anything changes, I'll know within minutes." She looked at him in a way that he was starting to recognize. Not surprise exactly, but the specific expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of a situation they thought they'd assessed correctly. "You arranged that last night." "After the call, yes." "Who is she?" "Former federal investigator. She's reliable." Amelia was quiet. Then, "You've been running a parallel operation since before you even told me about the tracking device." "Since the first week," he said, "when I noticed the Suburban." She exhaled slowly. It wasn't anger. It was something more complicated. The slight disorientation of realizing that the person you thought you'd hired for one thing had quietly been doing something larger the whole time. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I work for you," Nathan said, "not the other way around. And I needed to know what I was telling you before I told you." He met her eyes. "I also needed to know you were worth protecting." She held his gaze for a moment. "And?" "You found the financial irregularities yourself. You didn't go to the board, didn't go to internal channels, went external and quiet. You came to a diner in your own neighborhood in a coat and your hair down so nobody recognizes you." He paused. "You're doing this right. Most people in your position don't do this right." She looked at the table for a second. It was the first time he'd seen her composure slip in a direction other than exhaustion. Something briefly and genuinely touched before she pulled it back. "Okay," she said. "Thursday. What do I need to do?" "Exactly what you normally do," he said. "Don't change anything about your behavior. Don't look at Garrett differently. Don't look at Robert Hale differently. The advantage we have right now is that they think I'm following their instructions, and they don't know about this conversation." "What about the surveillance software on my phone?" He went still. "What software?" She reached into her coat pocket again and produced her phone, already open to a screen he didn't immediately recognize. "My IT director found it Saturday night. He's the one person in the technology division I'm certain of. He's been with the company since my father's time, and there's nobody on earth who would pay him enough to flip." She held the phone out to him. "Someone installed monitoring software on my device. It captures keystrokes, reads messages, accesses the microphone when the screen is active." Nathan looked at the screen carefully. The application was disguised as a system utility, the kind of thing that would be invisible to a standard security scan if you didn't know what you were looking for. It was sophisticated. Not the most sophisticated he'd ever seen, but well above the level of an amateur. "When was it installed?" "Based on what Marcus found, my IT director, also named Marcus, which has been confusing this week, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, he thinks it was remote, triggered by a link I clicked in what looked like an internal communications message." A phishing attack inside the company's own network, Nathan said. Targeted. Specific. And it went to my device, not the company's general infrastructure. She took the phone back, which means someone knows how to move inside our systems without triggering our security flags, which means someone in IT or with IT level access is part of this. The shape of it was getting clearer, not cleaner, clearer. The difference between those two things was significant. What was emerging was not a simple power grab by one ambitious executive. This was layered. Financial fraud constructed to implicate Amelia, surveillance of her communications, tracking of her movements, a threat against Nathan's personal life to control his behavior, and a board vote positioned as the legal mechanism for everything else. Someone had been building this for months, possibly longer. Has your IT director, the one named Marcus, disabled the software? Nathan asked. Not yet. I told him to leave it active. Good. Same logic as the tracking device. Yes. If they're listening through your phone and they hear normal behavior, we maintain the advantage. He thought for a moment. I need you to have a specific conversation on that phone tonight. Something that will test a theory I have about who specifically is monitoring the feed. She raised an eyebrow. What kind of conversation? A fabricated one. With someone you trust, your attorney, your IT director, doesn't matter. I need you to mention a specific piece of false information about Thursday's route. Something believable. Then I want to see if anyone's behavior changes in a way that corresponds to that information. She understood immediately. A canary. Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly. You're going to be careful, she said. It was not entirely a question. I'm going to be methodical, he said. Careful is for people who have the option of walking away. She looked at him for a long moment. Do you have that option? He thought about Lily eating macaroni from the box. He thought about the 6-year-old girl who wanted to know if the car had a TV in it. No, he said. Not anymore. They sat for another few minutes, working through details, and the bad coffee went cold between them. And outside on Randolph, the city was getting its Tuesday morning underway. Delivery trucks and early commuters, and a woman walking a very small dog in a rain jacket that matched her own. Ordinary life doing what ordinary life did, right up against the edge of something that was not ordinary at all. The two things coexisting the way they always did, visible only to the people who knew what to look for. He drove her to the office at 8:15. Garrett was waiting at the garage entrance, arms at his sides, face professionally neutral. Nathan watched him in the rearview mirror as they pulled in and saw nothing definitive. But he also noticed that Garrett took his phone out of his pocket and looked at it for 3 seconds in a way that had no obvious operational purpose, and then put it away. He filed it. The days between Tuesday and Thursday moved like water, finding a level, slow, and inevitable, and carrying things you couldn't see on the surface. Nathan drove his routes. He said what he normally said, which wasn't much. He watched Garrett the way you watch a weather system. Not alarmed, just tracking. He watched Robert Hale's assistant on the second floor, who sometimes appeared in the garage at odd moments, with the vague explanations that people offered when they didn't want to explain themselves. He watched the Suburban, which had returned on Wednesday. Same plates, different parking location, this time on a side street east of the building where it had a sightline to the garage entrance. Wednesday evening, walking to his car in the staff parking structure, he found a piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. No envelope, no identifying marks. 4 handwritten words. Thursday. Stay en route. He stood in the empty structure and looked at it and understood that they were nervous. People who were confident didn't send reminders. The reminder meant something had changed in their calculus. Maybe the canary had worked and they'd picked up Amelia's fabricated phone conversation and were adjusting for it, or maybe they'd noticed some shift in behavior they hadn't expected. Either way, nervous was a state that produced mistakes. He put the note in his jacket pocket and drove home and made dinner and helped Lily with an art project involving an unreasonable quantity of glitter. And when she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table and thought about what he knew and what he didn't and where the holes were. He knew the tracking device was there. The phone was monitored. The route change had come through Robert Hale's office. The Suburban was a fixed surveillance presence. Someone with IT access was inside the operation. The board vote was 9 days away, and Marcus Hale, the COO, was the most probable architect of everything. He didn't know exactly how many people inside the company were involved, what the specific plan for Thursday was, whether the threat against Lily was operational or purely deterrent, and what they intended to do with 48 hours if whatever they were planning on Thursday actually worked. 48 hours kept coming back to him. The call had mentioned Thursday's route and had been framed around compliance for that one event. The board vote was 9 days away. 48 hours of disruption, of Amelia being unavailable, unreachable, unable to function as CEO, would be enough to trigger emergency board authority, enough for a motion to be called and voted on without her present, enough for the financial misconduct narrative to land without her there to counter it. They didn't need to harm her. They needed to isolate her. He wrote that down. He stared at it. Then he picked up his phone and sent Amelia a single sentence through the secure channel. They don't need to hurt you. They need 48 hours. Her reply came 11 minutes later. I know. I've been thinking the same thing. And then after a pause of about 2 minutes, the canary worked. Garrett called his brother-in-law at 11 p.m. last night. His brother-in-law works in logistics for a company that shares an address with the Vantage Acquisitions primary shell account. Nathan read it twice. Garrett with the earpiece he wore like a second skin, the man who had been 3 feet from Amelia for 18 months, whose job was to be the last line of protection between her and anything that meant her harm. Garrett, who had looked at his phone for 3 seconds in the garage on Tuesday morning. He thought about the fact that Garrett knew every route before Nathan drove it, knew every meeting location, every scheduled departure, every variance in Amelia's day, had been present for every security briefing for over a year, knew the company's emergency response protocols, knew who to call when something went wrong, knew who to call to make sure something went wrong. He sent back, "Is Diaz clean? 3 minutes." "I think so." She came through a different agency, vetted through a channel Garrett didn't control. "But I don't know for certain. I need to know for certain before Thursday. Working on it." "Sleep, Nathan." He almost smiled at that. She'd learned his first name somewhere in the past week, had been using it since Tuesday morning in the diner, easy and natural, as if she'd always called him that, as if the shift from formality to something else had happened without either of them deciding to make it happen. He did not sleep much, but he pulled the blanket up and closed his eyes, and in the quiet of the Pilsen apartment, with the radiator knocking and Lily's white noise machine just barely audible through the wall, he went through the plan for Thursday piece by piece, running every variation he could construct, looking for the seam where it came apart. There was always a seam. You just had to find it before they did. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray, the specific quality of Chicago November that felt less like weather and more like a judgment. Nathan was in the garage at 6:45. He inspected the car. Not 40 minutes this time because he'd done a full inspection last night after hours and nothing had changed, but he checked the specific points that mattered most. Brake system, steering, fuel line, the tracking device still in place under the rear bumper. Then he checked the route one more time on the map application, memorizing not just the scheduled path, but every alternating street within a half-mile corridor, every loading zone, every parking structure, every point where a vehicle could exit a major artery and disappear into a grid of smaller streets. He also memorized, one more time, the maintenance road that branched off Route 41, about 6 miles north of the last scheduled waypoint on Amelia's route. He'd found it 3 weeks ago. Unmarked on most maps, used by county utility crews, gated but not locked. He'd driven it twice on his own time in the Accord. It ran for approximately 1.5 miles through scrubland before joining a county road that fed back toward the highway from a direction nobody watching the main route would anticipate. At 7:51, Amelia came through the garage door. Diaz was with her. Diaz only, no Garrett, which told Nathan that the conversation he'd been hoping for had happened and that Amelia had made a decision about what to do with it. Amelia's face was composed, the specific composure of someone who has made their decisions and moved past the part where decisions are revisited. She got into the car without a word. Diaz got into the front passenger seat and looked straight ahead. Nathan pulled out. "Diaz," he said, once they were clear of the garage and into traffic. "Yeah," she said. "You were briefed?" This morning, 4 a.m. She said it without inflection. I know about Garrett. Is there anyone else in the security team I should be uncertain about? Kovac, she said. Junior detail started 6 weeks ago. I've never trusted his references. Everyone else is clean as far as I can tell, but Kovac is the one I'd watch. Nathan filed it. Okay. The route ran north, along the lakefront initially, then inland toward a law firm in Evanston where Amelia had a scheduled meeting with her independent auditor and her attorney. The meeting was real. Nathan had verified that independently by checking the calendar through a channel that didn't go through Robert Hale's office. The route, however, was the route they'd let Garrett know about. The specific route that the fabricated phone conversation had described, which meant that if Garrett had communicated it, as Amelia's message suggested he had, whoever was waiting would be waiting on that path. They were 6 minutes into the drive when Nathan saw them. Not the Suburban this time. 2 vehicles, a dark blue panel van parked illegally on a side street with a sightline to the route, and a second black SUV idling in a loading zone 3 blocks ahead in a position that would require the limousine to pass within 10 feet of it. The van had been there long enough for condensation to form on the rear windows. The SUV had a second person visible in the passenger seat. In his peripheral vision, he saw Diaz's hand move to her jacket. I see them, Nathan said quietly. The van's been there a while, she said. I know. He kept his speed and his lane. There's going to be a deviation in about 40 seconds. When it happens, I need you to stay with Ms. Sterling, regardless of what the van does. Understood. In the back seat, Amelia said, Nathan. Just his name, not scared, checking in. I have it, he said. He drove 4 more seconds on the scheduled route, perfectly normal, nothing to trigger early movement, and then he turned left on a street that was not on any route they had communicated to anyone. A clean, unmarked move that put them heading west into a grid of narrow streets in a neighborhood that was not on the way to Evanston and was not on the way to anywhere the van and the SUV had been positioned to intercept. In his mirror, he saw the SUV pull out of the loading zone. He turned again, north this time, then west, then a quick right into an alley that cut through to a parallel street, and when he came out the other side, the SUV was not visible. He drove 2 more blocks and checked all mirrors and found nothing following. Clear, Diaz said, scanning her side. For now, Nathan said. For now, she agreed. He heard Amelia exhale in the back seat. Not a dramatic sound, just the careful release of held breath, the body catching up to a situation the mind had already processed. They were waiting, she said. Yes. On the route Garrett knew about. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He drove with both hands on the wheel through the grid of side streets, taking a path no algorithm would have suggested, moving northwest by a route that required knowing the city rather than mapping it. Where are we going? She finally asked. Somewhere we can think for a few minutes, he said. Then we decide the next step. He found it 4 minutes later, a church parking lot in Rogers Park, empty at this hour on a weekday, screened from the street by a row of mature oaks that had lost most of their leaves but still created a visual barrier. He pulled in and cut the engine. For a moment, the 3 of them sat in the quiet car, and the cold light came through the bare branches and lay across the hood in thin lines. Then Amelia said, They weren't going to kidnap me. No, Nathan said. They were going to make it look like you did. He turned in his seat to look at her. She was pale. Not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the particular cold that came from understanding something fully for the first time. The false reports, she said slowly, working through it. If they stopped the car on a route that had been deviated from the scheduled path, on a route nobody authorized, and I was missing for 48 hours while an anonymous tip went to the financial press about the misconduct documents they've been building, and Garrett filed a report saying the driver had gone off route without authorization, you'd be the CEO who disappeared, Nathan said, and I'd be the driver who took you. The silence that followed was the kind that came from truly seeing something ugly for the first time, not just grasping the concept, but actually seeing it, the architecture of it, the careful, patient construction of a trap built from 100 legitimate-looking components. The shell accounts, the financial documents, the tracking device to monitor movement, The surveillance software to intercept communications. Garrett inside the security apparatus. Robert Hale managing route information. Someone in IT enabling the phone access. All of it converging on a Thursday morning in November, calibrated for exactly 48 hours, built to be irrefutable by the time anyone started asking the right questions. They used my daughter, Nathan said. Not loud, not heated, just a statement of fact placed in the room like an object. Amelia looked at him. I know, she said quietly. I want you to know that's the part I take personally, he said. Everything else is a problem to solve. That part is personal. She held his gaze. She didn't offer reassurance or apology or anything that would have been inadequate. She just held his gaze and nodded once, and he understood that she understood, and that was enough. Okay, Diaz said from the front seat. What do we do now? Nathan looked at the bare oaks beyond the windshield for a moment. He thought about what they had. The tracking device, the surveillance records Paula had been compiling on the Suburban, the communication between Garrett and his brother-in-law, the financial documents with the external auditor, the canary result, the note under the windshield wiper, the phone with the monitoring software still active, and the very important fact that the people who had built this trap had just watched their asset deviate from the controlled route without them understanding why. They would be scrambling right now, adjusting. Nervous people adjusting quickly made different kinds of mistakes than nervous people waiting. The board vote was in 8 days. He thought about the abandoned checkpoint above Route 41 that he'd driven twice in the Accord. Secure, isolated, far enough from any monitored environment that a conversation could happen without anyone listening. A place to put everything on the table and make a plan. There's somewhere we can go, he said. We won't be followed there, and I think we need a few hours to put everything together in one place before anyone makes another move. A few hours, Amelia said. The materials you have, the materials I have, what Diaz knows about the security structure, what your auditor has found, we need all of it in one place, visible, so we can see the whole shape of it. She looked at him for a second. And then? And then we figure out how to take it back, he said. He started the car. The oaks moved slightly in a wind that had come up off the lake, bare branches scratching a pale sky. He pulled out of the parking lot and pointed them north, toward the highway, toward the place above the mountain road where the abandoned checkpoint sat in its clearing, and the city fell away below, and the whole complicated wreck of the last 3 weeks could finally be seen from a distance. His phone buzzed once on the seat. Paula. All clear at Henderson. Your girl is fine. She's wearing a yellow hat today. He read it at a red light, exhaled once, put the phone down, drove. The maintenance road off Route 41 had no name on any map Nathan had found. It appeared on one county utility survey from 11 years ago as Service Access 7C, and on nothing else. The gate at the entrance was a simple swing bar mounted in concrete posts, painted orange once and now mostly rust, secured with a padlock that Nathan had opened twice before with a bump key he kept on his ring next to the car keys. The third time was the same as the first two. The bar swung inward, and he drove through, and Diaz got out and swung it closed behind them and got back in without being asked. The road itself was unpaved, compacted gravel over clay, running through a corridor of scrub brush and second-growth trees that had taken over what was once a utility easement. It was rough enough that the limousine, not a vehicle designed for unpaved surfaces, moved with a careful, unhappy quality that Nathan compensated for by dropping to about 8 miles an hour and picking the line the way you picked a line on a trail. Amelia held the armrest in the back seat and said nothing. Diaz braced her hand on the dashboard. After a mile and a half, the road opened into a clearing. The abandoned checkpoint sat at the far end, a prefabricated structure about the size of a double-wide trailer, its windows boarded over with plywood that had warped in several winters of weather. A chain-link fence around a small yard that had been overtaken by tall grass, now dead, and flattened by frost. Beside the structure was a covered overhang that had once sheltered county vehicles, the corrugated metal roof still mostly intact, drooping slightly on one end where a support post had settled. Nathan pulled under the overhang and cut the engine. The silence was immediate and total in a way that city people sometimes found unsettling, and Nathan found something close to comfortable. Wind moved through the dead grass outside. Above the tree line, the sky was the same pale gray it had been all morning, flat and low, the kind of November sky that promised nothing and delivered exactly that. "This is where we're thinking," Amelia said, looking through the window at the checkpoint building. "Nobody's coming up that road without us knowing," Nathan said. "And nobody knows this road exists." "You knew it existed." "I looked for it." She got out of the car. Diaz got out and immediately began a quiet perimeter check, moving around the clearing with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who had been trained to look for things before being surprised by them, which made Nathan trust her more than he already did. He retrieved the document bag from the trunk, the one he'd loaded that morning before departure with everything he'd accumulated over the past 3 weeks. His legal pad notes, photographs of the tracking device, the RF scan records, Paula's surveillance reports on the Suburban, the timeline he'd built of every anomalous event from the brake line to the note under his windshield wiper. Amelia had her own materials. Not a bag, but a portfolio that she'd been carrying under her coat, flat against her body, which told him she'd understood before they left that this might be the kind of morning that required keeping certain things close. She set it on the hood of the limousine and opened it. They stood at the hood of the car under the corrugated roof and spread everything out and began. It took almost 20 minutes just to lay it all in order. Amelia's financial documents alongside Nathan's surveillance records, alongside the timeline of Garrett's movements that Diaz contributed from memory, filling in gaps from the security detail schedule she'd been running in her head for weeks, because she was the kind of person who kept those things in her head the way other people kept grocery lists. When it was all out and visible, the picture was large enough that they had to step back slightly to see all of it at once. "Walk me through the money first," Nathan said to Amelia. She pointed at a sequence of account references. "The Vantage acquisition is structured through a holding entity. Standard practice, nothing unusual. What my auditor found is a secondary channel running parallel to the main acquisition account. 42 million moved through it over 6 months in transfers that are sized and timed to stay below automatic reporting thresholds." She paused. "But the transfers aren't random. They correspond to specific dates." "What dates?" She looked at him. "Board meetings. Every major board session over the past 6 months has a corresponding transfer, usually within 48 hours after. The amounts vary, but they aggregate to approximately 14 million per session." Nathan looked at that for a moment. "Payment structure," he said. "That's what my auditor thinks. 3 board members, 3 tranches, 3 meetings." She pulled out a separate sheet. "The accounts receiving the money are offshore, but my auditor traced the beneficial ownership of 2 of them through a chain of nominee directors to entities that share legal representation with companies owned by Philip Strand and Connie Whitmore." "Your 2 compromised board members?" "Yes. And the authorization signatures on the transfers, the ones that appear in the acquisition documents, are structured to look like they came from my office. My name appears on 2 of the authorization forms. I did not sign them. Forged, or generated using a digital signature key that was compromised." She looked at Nathan steadily. "Which would require someone with access to our internal finance systems at the administrative level. Which brings it back to the IT access problem," he said. "Which brings it back to whoever put the software on my phone." Diaz had returned from the perimeter and was standing at the edge of the overhang, listening. "The IT access," she said. "You said your IT director found the monitoring software. What's his read on who inside the company could have deployed it?" "He gave me 3 names," Amelia said. 2 of them are junior administrators who he's monitored since Saturday and who show no anomalous behavior. The third is a senior systems architect named Gerald Pruitt, who has been with the company for 9 years and who has not come into work since last Wednesday." "Since before the Canary," Nathan said. "Yes." "Which means either he saw something coming and left voluntarily, or someone told him to make himself scarce." "Marcus," Amelia said. She said it the way she'd been saying her COO's name for the past week, with the specific flatness of someone who had finished being surprised and was now only tired of it. "Marcus Hale has the relationships, he has the authority. He's been here long enough to know every system, every person, every pressure point." She looked at the documents spread across the hood. "I keep thinking about the timeline. He would have started building this the moment I took over, 18 months. He spent 18 months making it look like loyalty while he built every piece of this. Did your father trust him? Nathan asked. She was quiet for a second. My father trusted him because Marcus had been here since the beginning, because he knew the company better than almost anyone. She looked out at the dead grass beyond the fence. My father trusted a lot of people based on duration rather than evidence. I've spent 18 months trying to be smarter than that. You found the financial irregularities yourself, Nathan said, before anyone told you to look. It took me too long. It took you 3 weeks. The people building this had 18 months. She looked back at him. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not softened exactly, but acknowledged. That's a generous read. It's an accurate one. Diaz pulled her coat tighter against the cold that was working through the gaps in the corrugated roof. We have 8 days to the board vote, she said. What we have right now is compelling, but not courtroom ready. The financial documents need chain of custody. The surveillance records need authentication. The Canary result is useful intelligence, but it's not evidence without the phone records showing what Garrett actually communicated. My auditor can certify the financial chain of custody, Amelia said. She's been documenting her process. The suburban surveillance is documentable, Nathan said. Paula can produce logs, photographs, timestamps. Garrett's phone records, Diaz said. That's the one that needs a legal mechanism. You can't compel those without cause. We don't need to compel them, Amelia said slowly. She was looking at something in the middle distance, working through something. Garrett used a company-issued phone to make the call to his brother-in-law. I verified that this morning. Company devices are subject to monitoring under the employment agreement. I have the authority to direct IT to pull records from any company-issued device. Can you do that without going through Robert Hale's office? Nathan asked. I can if I direct it through legal counsel who bypasses the standard operations channel. She was already pulling her phone, the compromised one, which they'd agreed she'd keep active for controlled communications, out of her pocket and then stopping herself. Not on this phone. Use mine, Nathan said. She took his phone. She dialed a number from memory and waited 3 rings. Carol, she said when it connected. Her voice shifted register slightly. Not warmer, but more direct, the way people get when they're talking to someone who can actually do something. It's Amelia. I need you to pull device records for employee ID G4471, Company Mobile, last 14 days and route a copy to me through your office secure channel. Yes, now. Yes, I'll hold. She held for 2 minutes. Nathan watched the clearing. A crow landed on the fence post at the far edge of the yard, considered the situation, and flew away. He thought about Garrett and how long Garrett had been in that position and how many times Amelia had trusted him with her physical safety based purely on the assumption that the people assigned to protect you were actually protecting you. He thought about how many assumptions like that he'd watched get people hurt. Thank you, Carol, Amelia said. Yes. Keep it in your office until I tell you otherwise. She ended the call and handed Nathan his phone back. 2 hours, she said. She'll have the records in 2 hours. Then we wait, Nathan said. They didn't wait idle. While Diaz worked the perimeter again with the careful repetition of someone who needed movement to think, Nathan and Amelia went through the timeline piece by piece, filling gaps, identifying what they had and what they were still missing. The work was slow and often went sideways. Documents that seemed to connect turned out to require additional verification. Sequences that looked like proof turned out to be circumstantial when you examined them honestly. And twice, Amelia put her hands flat on the hood of the car and closed her eyes for a moment in the way that people do when they're trying to find the bottom of their patience. She didn't have a coat heavy enough for the temperature, and he could see her getting cold in increments, the slight set of her shoulders, the way she kept her arms close to her body. He went to the trunk and found the emergency kit he kept there, a habit left over from another life, and pulled out the thermal blanket folded inside it. Here, he said. She looked at the silver emergency blanket with an expression that under other circumstances might have been funny. Is this a car emergency kit item? Yes, ma'am. It's going to look ridiculous. It'll be warm. She took it without further argument and wrapped it around her shoulders. And she did look somewhat ridiculous, a CEO in a charcoal blazer, wrapped in a crinkled silver emergency blanket, standing at the hood of a limousine in an abandoned checkpoint clearing on a gray November morning. She also stopped visibly shivering within about 2 minutes, which was the point. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it." They went back to the documents. At some point around 10:30, Diaz appeared with 3 cups of coffee, produced from a thermos she had in her bag that she hadn't mentioned until now, which Nathan appreciated on a professional level. The coffee was not good, but it was hot, and hot outranked good by a significant margin in a clearing with no windbreak and a temperature in the low 40s. "Can I ask you something?" Amelia said at one point. She was looking at the section of Nathan's legal pad where he'd written about the initial suburban sighting and the steps he'd taken to trace it. "Sure. When you found the tracking device, the real decision point," she looked up at him. "You could have reported it through normal channels. Garrett, Robert Hale's office, company security protocol. That's what the procedure would say." "Yes." "But you went around all of it and came directly to me." "Yes." "That's not standard driver behavior." He looked at her for a moment. "No, it's not." "So what made you decide to—" She stopped, like she wasn't quite sure how to finish the sentence. "Trust you?" he offered. "I was going to say act independently, but yes, that too." He thought about how to answer it honestly. "You turned down 3 candidates who got in the car without looking at it," he said. "You came down to the garage yourself to watch. You looked at what I found, and your first question was whether you could see it, not whether I was right or wrong." He paused. "You asked the right questions. People who ask the right questions when something is wrong are the people worth being honest with." She considered that. The silver blanket crinkled when she moved. "You could have found the brake line and said nothing. Driven the car, collected the paycheck." "I could have. Why didn't you?" "Because someone was going to get hurt." "That's it?" "That's always it," he said, and he meant it without drama, without any additional weight, just the plain fact of it, the thing that had been true about him since before he'd had language for it. He was not someone who could be in the presence of a preventable harm and do nothing about it. Whatever else he was or wasn't, that was fixed. She looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through the dead grass. Somewhere in the tree line a branch cracked and settled. "Your wife," she said carefully. "I had HR pull the full background when I decided to hire you. I know she passed away. I don't know the details, and I'm not asking. But I want you to know that I'm aware you're doing this while also dealing with that, and raising a daughter alone. And She stopped. "I don't have a way to finish that sentence that doesn't sound patronizing." "Then don't finish it," he said. Not unkindly. She nodded. "Okay." The 2 hours passed, and Carol called back on Nathan's phone with the device records. Amelia read through them on the screen while Nathan watched over her shoulder, and when she found what they were looking for, she went very still. The night after the Canary conversation, the fabricated route discussion on Amelia's monitored phone, Garrett had made 4 calls from his company device between 11:15 and 11:50 p.m. The first was to the number associated with his brother-in-law. The second and third were to numbers that Amelia didn't recognize but wrote down. The fourth was to a number she did recognize, and when she read it, her expression closed in a way Nathan hadn't seen before. "Who is it?" he asked. "Marcus Hale's personal cell," she said. And there it was. The clean line from Garrett to the man at the top of it. Not circumstantial, not inferential. A phone record from a company device, legally accessible, showing the direct connection between the man inside Amelia's security detail and the man who had spent 18 months building the architecture to take her down. Diaz said quietly, "That's it." "That's not everything," Amelia said. "But it's enough to start." She looked at Nathan. "We need to get back to the city." "We need to talk about what happens when we get back," he said. "They know this morning didn't go the way they planned. They know the car deviated. They've had 3 hours to adjust whatever they were going to do next. What do you think they do next?" "Accelerate," he said. "The 48-hour window was built around Thursday. They've lost Thursday. They still have 8 days before the board vote, which means they have time to try again, but they also have the problem that we're now running our own operation, and they don't know what we know." He looked at the documents on the hood. "They'll make a move soon, probably before tomorrow morning." "What kind of move?" "The safest thing they can do is push the misconduct narrative before we can undermine it. Get the financial fraud story out through a friendly channel. A journalist, a board member, someone who can put it in public before we have our counter-evidence assembled. He paused. Or they push the narrative that you're missing, that the driver took you off route. The false kidnapping, she said. Yes. Which means we need to be visible and credible before they can establish that story. Amelia started gathering documents, sorting them into the portfolio with quick, sure movements. The silver emergency blanket slid off her shoulders, and she didn't stop to pick it up. I need to be in front of my attorney and my auditor with all of this today. Together, in person, in a room that isn't connected to any building my COO has access to. She looked at Nathan. Can you get me there without being followed? Yes. And I need Carol to preserve those device records through the company's legal hold system before anyone has a chance to go. Already done, he said. Tell her to do it the moment you called her, while you were on hold. She stopped, looked at him. I didn't tell you to do that. No, ma'am. A beat of silence. You anticipated it. It was the obvious next step. She looked at him for another moment, and something in her expression changed. Not dramatically, just a small shift, the particular look of someone who has stopped being surprised by a person and started being something else. Grateful, maybe, or something adjacent to it that didn't have a clean name. Let's go, she said. They loaded everything back into the document bag and the portfolio. Diaz stowed the thermos and made one final pass of the clearing, picked up the silver blanket from the ground and folded it efficiently and handed it back to Nathan, who put it back in the emergency kit. He backed the limousine out from under the overhang, turned it in the clearing, and went back down the service road at 8 miles an hour, with the bare trees on either side and the frost still showing in the shaded spots, and the city waiting somewhere behind the tree line. When they came out onto Route 41, two things happened almost simultaneously. Nathan's phone buzzed. Paula. Escalation at Henderson. Unknown male approached the school fence line at 11:40, appeared to photograph the entrance, left when the duty officer approached. I have him on camera, sending images. And in the rearview mirror 4 car lengths back on Route 41, a black SUV pulled out of a rest area and settled into traffic behind them. Not the same vehicle as this morning. Different plates. Same profile. We have a tail, Nathan said. Flat, no alarm in his voice. Diaz turned and looked and turned back. Route 41 south. They'll be able to stay with us all the way into the city without standing out. I know. Options? He was already running them. Route 41 south for approximately 6 miles before the interchange where 3 different highway options branched. South toward Indiana, west toward O'Hare, northeast back toward the city. The SUV behind them likely had someone running coordination, someone who could radio ahead to any of those branches. A simple route change wouldn't lose them. And he couldn't do what he'd done this morning, the grid of side streets, because they were in open territory now, not the city, 2 lanes each direction with no useful exits for the next 3 miles. He looked at his mirrors and thought about what he knew about this road from the 2 times he'd driven it in the Accord. 3 miles ahead was a construction zone that had been active for 6 weeks, a bridge replacement on the southbound side that compressed traffic to 1 lane and created a backup that sometimes stretched a mile. During the backup, vehicles moved at 5 miles an hour or less. In that condition, maintaining a follow distance of 4 car lengths became mathematically impossible without making it obvious you were following. Hold tight, he said. He maintained speed in lane and let the SUV believe it had an untroubled tail. He watched the mirror and watched the road and counted distance, and when the construction zone appeared ahead, the orange signs, the line of brake lights beginning to bloom in the gray morning, he let the limousine slow naturally with traffic. 1 car among many, nothing distinctive. The SUV slowed behind him. 4 car lengths became 3 as the compression began. Then Nathan did something that wasn't on any map and wasn't in any protocol. He took the construction zone emergency vehicle access, a gravel cutoff on the right shoulder marked with orange cones and a do not enter sign that applied to civilian vehicles. And he went through it at exactly the speed that suggested he belonged there. Not fast, not slow, just the specific confidence of a vehicle that had authorization to be somewhere. And on the other side of the cones, the road opened into the construction zone's staging area, where equipment was parked, and contractor vehicles moved, and nobody was paying attention to a black limousine, because black limousines occasionally carried the kind of people that construction site managers didn't want to question. He went through the staging area and out the other side onto the bypass road the contractors used, which fed back to Route 41 a mile ahead of the construction zone, ahead of the backup, ahead of the SUV, which was now somewhere in the compression, unable to follow without abandoning the follow itself. In the rear-view mirror, nothing. Diaz exhaled. "That was illegal," she said. "Emergency vehicle access," Nathan said. "Arguable." "Where'd you learn to do that?" "Long routes," he said. Amelia was looking at her hands in her lap. She looked up and found Nathan's eyes in the rearview mirror. He held her gaze for a second. "You're okay," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not scared." And then with an honesty that seemed to cost her something, "I'm angry." "That's fine," he said. "Angry is useful. Scared isn't." She nodded once and looked back out the window at the passing landscape. He drove. He thought about the image Paula had sent, the unknown man at the school fence, photographing the entrance, gone when approached. A message, deliberate, calibrated. "We can reach what you love." He thought about Lily in her yellow hat. He thought about the white noise machine and the radiator and the small apartment that he'd made into something that felt, on most nights, like enough. He thought about what Amelia had said in the clearing, the sentence she hadn't known how to finish. He'd let her not finish it. But he'd understood what she'd meant. She'd meant, "I see you, all of it, not just the part that's useful to me." And it was something. He wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but it was something. His phone buzzed again. A different number this time, one he recognized. His former teammate in Boise, a man named Ray Kowalczyk, who had once spent 4 days in a river valley with Nathan under conditions they'd agreed never to describe to anyone, and who now did private security consulting and sometimes texted about nothing and sometimes about everything. The text said, "Heard a name today. Marcus Hale, Chicago. You know it?" Nathan read it twice, then he replied, "How'd you hear it?" Ray. "Client in the M&A space. Someone's been shopping a story about a Sterling Meridian CEO and financial misconduct. My client was approached by a journalist looking for corroboration. My client thought it smelled wrong and called me. I thought it smelled like you." So it had already started. The narrative push, the misconduct story being placed before they'd had time to build the counter, before the attorney review, before the financial documents were authenticated, before the device records were in legal hold. He typed, "Tell your client don't touch it. Story's fabricated. I need 2 days. Ray. "You have 2 days? I'm working on it." Ray. "Always are. Stay in one piece." He put the phone down and looked at the road ahead and thought about 2 days and what 2 days required and how much of what they had was enough and how much was still not quite enough. And the cold November landscape passed on either side, flat and brown and specific in the way that real things were specific. Not beautiful, not ugly, just exactly what it was. "There's something else," he said. Amelia looked up from the portfolio in her lap. "They've already started pushing the misconduct story to journalists. Someone approached a media contact looking for corroboration this morning." She absorbed this without visible reaction, but he saw her jaw tighten. "How do you know?" "A contact of mine. He's reliable." "Then we have less time than 8 days." "We have less time than 8 days," he confirmed. She looked out the window. He could see her doing what she did, not panicking, going to information, going to the next question, the next move. "The auditor," she said. "She can have authenticated documents ready by tomorrow morning. The device records are in legal hold. The surveillance documentation from your contact, I can have that formatted and chain of custody clean by tonight. My attorney needs to brief 2 independent board members, the ones I trust, before this story breaks publicly. If they have the counter evidence in hand before the narrative lands, the misconduct claim dies on arrival." She was sitting forward now, the portfolio open on her knees, writing something on one of the pages. "And I need to find Gerald Pruitt, the IT architect who disappeared. If he went quiet because he knew what was coming, he's either scared or he's protected. Either way, he's a witness. Either way, Marcus doesn't want him found." She looked up. Can your contact, the investigator, Paula, can Paula find someone who doesn't want to be found? If they're findable, Nathan said. Yes. Find him, she said. He noted it. They were 40 minutes from the city now. The highway ahead was clear, the construction zone behind them, the tail gone or repositioned somewhere he couldn't see yet. He kept checking his mirrors every 15 seconds, the systematic pattern of someone for whom paranoia and professionalism had long ago become the same thing. Nothing obvious followed them. That meant nothing. It meant they were either clean or being followed by someone better than this morning's team, and he had no way to know which from the highway. What he knew was that they had today. They had tonight. They had tomorrow morning to get everything assembled and in the right hands before the story broke and the narrative locked and the board was presented with a version of events that had been 18 months in the building and was designed to be believed. 8 days to the vote. Maybe less if the story moved fast. Maybe one day if a major publication ran it before they were ready. He thought about what Ray had said. You have 2 days? He thought about the construction zone access road and the abandoned checkpoint and the maintenance road with no name on any map, and the way he'd driven the Accord through both of them twice before he ever needed to use them. He thought about the things you memorized before you needed them. Nathan, Amelia said. Yes, ma'am. We're going to do this. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the road and the flat gray sky and the city beginning to show itself at the edge of the horizon, the first high buildings dark against the clouds, the skyline of a place that contained Lily in her yellow hat, and an apartment with a knocking radiator and a legal pad full of notes that added up to something he hadn't been sure about until this morning. Yes, he said. We are. He drove. Paula found Gerald Pruitt at 6:40 in the evening in an extended stay motel off I-90 near Rosemont, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions and had a parking lot full of vehicles that belonged to people who were between something and something else. He was registered under a different name but had used his actual credit card at the gas station attached to the motel, which Paula described as the single most avoidable mistake a person trying to disappear could make, and which told Nathan that Gerald Pruitt was not a professional at being hidden. He was just a scared man who had grabbed a bag and driven until the city was behind him and then stopped because he didn't know where else to go. Nathan drove out there alone. He left Amelia at her attorney's office in the West Loop, a woman named Carol Vance who had a conference room with no windows facing the street and a personal policy against company-issued communications devices inside her building, both of which Nathan approved of, where Amelia and the auditor and 2 independent board members she'd reached by phone that afternoon were assembling everything into something that could be presented. He left Diaz with them. He took the Accord, not the limousine, because the Accord was anonymous in a way the limousine could never be, and drove west on I-90 with the city lights behind him and the dark flat landscape of the near suburbs opening up ahead. The motel was called the Lakeview Inn, which was optimistic given that it was approximately 14 miles from any lake. Room 114 was at the far end of the ground floor, corner unit, parking space directly outside the door. The instinct of someone who wanted to be able to see his car from the window, who was sleeping with one ear open even if he didn't know why that instinct had kicked in. Nathan knocked twice, waited, knocked once more. The door opened on a chain. One eye appeared in the gap. The eye was bloodshot and frightened and belonged to a man in his late 40s who looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days. Gerald Pruitt, Nathan said. Not a question. Who are you? The voice was rough, dry. My name is Nathan Carter. I work for Amelia Sterling. I need 10 minutes of your time. The eye in the gap moved, checking the parking lot behind Nathan. You alone? Yes. How did you find me? Gas station receipt, Nathan said. Next time, use cash. A long pause. The chain came off. The door opened. Gerald Pruitt was a heavy-set man who had recently lost weight in the sudden, visible way that stress produced. Clothes that fit a month ago now hanging slightly wrong. A looseness at the collar that spoke to something rapid and involuntary. He let Nathan in and closed the door and stood with his back against it like he needed the support of the wall. The room had a laptop on the desk, 3 fast food bags in the trash, a suitcase that had been opened but not unpacked, and a legal pad with handwriting that covered both sides of 6 or 7 pages. The television was on with the sound off. A news channel, the closed captions running in white text across the bottom of the screen. "She sent you, Eb," Pruitt said. "Yes. Is she—" He stopped. "Is she okay? I saw the report this morning." "What report?" He pointed at the television. Nathan looked. The closed captions read, "Sources inside Sterling Meridian confirm CEO Amelia." Sterling was absent from corporate headquarters Thursday following an unscheduled deviation by her driver. Questions raised regarding financial irregularities. Board members Strand and Whitmore calling for emergency session. Nathan looked at the screen for 3 seconds. They'd moved faster than he'd expected. Not a journalist this time. They'd gone straight to the financial press with board members on record, which put it in a different category than a sourced tip. This was institutional. This was designed to look like legitimate corporate governance concern rather than a planted story. "She's fine," he said. "She's working." He turned from the television. "I need to know what you did and what you know. All of it." Pruitt sat on the edge of the bed. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for a moment, and then pulled his hands down and looked at Nathan with the expression of a man who had been waiting for someone to ask him exactly this question and was terrified of answering it. "I installed the monitoring software on her phone," he said. Nathan said nothing. He waited. "I didn't—" Pruitt started. Stopped. "I want to be clear about what happened. I was told it was a security audit. Routine monitoring of executive devices for cybersecurity compliance. The directive came through an internal channel with proper authorization headers. It looked completely legitimate, and I installed the software remotely in the second week of October." He looked at his hands. "I didn't find out what it actually was until 3 weeks later. One of my junior administrators noticed outbound data packets going to an IP address that wasn't in our authorized vendor list. When I traced it back, I found what I'd installed." "When was this?" "November 2nd, 2 weeks ago." He looked up. "I went to my supervisor. He told me to document it and sit on it until further notice. He said it was under investigation and I shouldn't discuss it." "Who is your supervisor?" "Robert Hale." Nathan nodded slowly. "And then you left." 4 days later, I came in on a Wednesday and there was a meeting request on my calendar from Marcus Hale, the COO, not Robert, scheduled for that afternoon with no agenda listed. No topic, just my name and his. Pruitt's voice had developed a slight tremor that he was visibly trying to control. "I've worked in this company for 9 years. Marcus Hale has never once requested a meeting with me directly. Not once." He paused. "I packed a bag at lunch and drove away, and I've been here since." "You have documentation," Nathan said, looking at the legal pad. "Everything I could copy before I left. Not files. I didn't take company files. I documented everything from memory. What I installed, when, the IP address the data was going to, the conversation with Robert Hale, the meeting request, everything." "The IP address," Nathan said. "Can you trace it?" "I already did. It routes through a commercial VPN, but the VPN provider has a known association with a security firm based out of Miami." He reached for the legal pad and flipped to a specific page. "The firm is called Redline Security Group. They're registered in Florida. They do corporate intelligence work. They've been cited in 2 previous cases involving, I looked this up, involving surveillance of corporate executives during hostile acquisition attempts." Nathan looked at the name. "Redline Security Group." He filed it. "Is there any direct link between Redline and anyone at Sterling Meridian?" Pruitt hesitated. Then, "Redline's primary registered agent in Illinois is a law firm. That law firm represents 3 entities in the Vantage acquisition." He looked at Nathan. "I found that Thursday morning, the morning I left. That's what made me not come back." "I need you to come back," Nathan said. Pruitt stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Not to the company, to the city, to an attorney's office in the West Loop where Ms. Sterling and her legal team are assembling a response to everything you just described." Nathan met his eyes. "What you have in that legal pad is witness testimony. It establishes the chain of how the monitoring software got onto her phone, who directed the cover-up, and the connection to an external surveillance firm. Without you, we have the software and the effect, but not the mechanism. With you, we have the full picture. If I come forward, You're already in it, Nathan said. Not harsh, just true. You've been in it since October 2nd when you installed that software. The question isn't whether you're involved. The question is which side of it you're on when it finishes. Pruitt looked at the legal pad. He looked at the television with its silent captions. He looked at the 3 fast food bags in the trash and the unpacked suitcase and the room that smelled like a place someone had been sitting in for 4 days without going anywhere. Will Ms. Sterling? He couldn't quite frame it. She's not interested in you, Nathan said. You were used. She understands that. She needs your account, your documentation, and your presence. That's all. Pruitt was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached under the mattress. Nathan noticed this without commenting on it and pulled out a USB drive. I did take one file, he said. I know I said I didn't, but I took one. The IP routing log. Full data. I copied it to this before I left, and then I told myself I hadn't taken anything because I was scared. He held it out. It's everything you need to connect the monitoring software to Redline and Redline to the acquisition. Nathan took the drive. Pack your bag, he said. I'll drive you. They arrived at Carol Vance's office at 8:22. Nathan had texted ahead. Amelia was in the conference room with Carol, with the auditor, a compact woman in her 60s named Frances, who wore reading glasses pushed up on her head and had the specific energy of someone who had been doing forensic accounting long enough to find corporate fraud less shocking than personally offensive. And with 2 board members Nathan hadn't met yet, a woman named Beatrice Okafor, who chaired the audit committee and who had apparently been Amelia's quiet ally for most of the past year, and an older man named Howard Wren, who said very little and took notes on a yellow legal pad, and whose handwriting was, Nathan noticed, extremely small and extremely precise. When Nathan brought Gerald Pruitt through the door, Amelia looked at him for a moment and then looked at Nathan with something that wasn't quite relief, but was in that neighborhood. Sit down, Mr. Pruitt, she said. Her voice was even, not warm, but not punishing. We have a lot to get through tonight. They worked for 4 hours. It was not elegant. Frances and Carol argued twice about evidentiary standards and chain of custody protocols, the specific arguing style of people who respected each other and had no time to be delicate about it. Howard Wren asked questions that seemed tangential until you followed them to their destination, at which point they turned out to be the only relevant questions. Beatrice Okafor made 3 phone calls from Carol's landline that she described only as board maintenance, which Nathan understood to mean she was working her relationships on the board's independent members before the story that was already on the financial wire had time to shape their understanding. Pruitt gave his account twice, once informally, once formally on record with Carol documenting, and produced the USB drive and the legal pad pages and held up reasonably well considering he was a man who had spent 4 days in a motel room running on fear and takeout. He shook during parts of it. He corrected himself twice when he got details slightly wrong, both times before anyone else caught it, which Nathan marked as a sign of genuine rather than performed honesty. Nathan sat in the corner and stayed out of the way. This part was not his. He'd done what he could do, which was drive and observe and accumulate and connect, and now the work had moved into a domain where he was not the relevant expertise. He watched and drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway, and at 10:15 stepped outside to the building's side entrance to call Paula. The school, he said. Still clear. I've been on rotation. Nothing since the fence incident this afternoon. Can you stay on it through the weekend? Already planning to. You okay? Working on it. You say that a lot. It's usually true. Paula made a sound that was approximately a laugh. What's actually happening, Nathan? I've been running surveillance for 10 days and reading financial news about your CEO, and now there's something on the wire about a kidnapping. It's not a kidnapping, it's a fabricated narrative designed to remove her from her position. And you're in the middle of it. That's where the car went. A pause. You want backup? I have 2 people I trust who can be in Chicago by morning. He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, which was different from reflexively declining. Maybe. Let me get through tonight. I'll know more by morning. Just say the word. He went back inside. Amelia was standing at the window of Carol's office, Carol having vacated the office itself for the conference room, which was now the operational center of everything, with her arms folded and her back to the door. Nathan came in quietly and she didn't turn. "The board vote," she said. "Strand and Whitmore filed paperwork this afternoon to move it to Monday, 3 days from now." He stopped. "They can do that?" "Under the emergency provision, a motion can be accelerated with signatures from 2 board members and approval from the company's general counsel." She turned. "Our general counsel is a man named David Park, who has been with the company since my father's time, and who I have trusted completely for 18 months. He read her expression. "Has." "David Park approved the motion at 4 p.m. this afternoon." She said it steadily, but he could hear the specific quality underneath it. The sound of someone absorbing a betrayal from a direction they hadn't anticipated, which was different from the betrayals you'd already mapped and prepared for. "He's been with us for 11 years. He had dinner at our house. He knew my mother." Nathan didn't offer anything. There wasn't anything to offer that would make that smaller than it was. "So Monday," he said. "Monday. We have 60 hours. She unfolded her arms and looked at the window, at the dark city outside. "Is it enough?" He thought about what they had: the financial documents with Francis's authentication, Pruitt's testimony and the USB drive establishing the surveillance chain, the device records proving Garrett's communication with Marcus Hale, the suburban surveillance from Paula, the tracking device, photographed and documented, the note under his windshield wiper, the communication timeline that Diaz had contributed, 2 board members in the next room who were now in possession of all of it and who had the standing to present it formally. "What we have is enough to tell the true story," he said. "Whether it's enough depends on whether the board is willing to hear it." "Beatrice thinks we have 5 votes," Amelia said. "Maybe 6. We need 7 to block the suspension motion." 5 and maybe 6 isn't 7. "No." She turned from the window. "The 7th vote is James Calloway. He's been neutral on the Hale alignment. He hasn't signed anything, hasn't attended the side meetings that Strand and Whitmore have been running, but he also hasn't committed to me. He's been on this board for 22 years. He knew my father well, and he knew Marcus Hale before I was in this building." She paused. "He's going to make his decision based on what he believes is true, not on politics, which means if I can get in front of him tonight or tomorrow with everything we have, he'll look at it and decide." "Where is he?" "His house in Kenilworth. Carol is calling him now." As if on cue, Carol appeared in the doorway. "He'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., his house." She looked at Amelia. "He said if you're coming to him directly instead of sending through channels, he wants to know why." "What did you tell him?" "That you'd explain in person." Carol pushed her glasses up. "He also asked if the financial press story was accurate. I told him that was something you'd address tomorrow." She looked between Amelia and Nathan. "I also told him you'd be bringing your security person." Nathan looked at Carol. "You told him about me?" "Beatrice told him about you," Carol said. "She said you were," and I'm quoting her directly, "the reason we have anything to work with at all." She retreated back to the conference room with the specific efficiency of a woman who delivered information and then got out of the way. Amelia looked at Nathan. He looked back at her. "Kenilworth," he said. 8 a.m. I'll drive." She almost smiled. Not quite. Too much pressure on too many sides for a real smile to find its way through, but almost. "You always drive," she said. "It's the job." "Is it still the job?" she said. And she meant it as something more specific than it sounded. She meant, after all of this, after the clearing and the maintenance road and the 4 hours in a conference room and the motel in Rosemont and whatever was coming in the next 60 hours, was it still just a job, in the plain sense? Was that still the word for it? He thought about how to answer that honestly. "It started as a job," he said. She nodded. "Okay," she said, and went back to the conference room. He stayed in Carol's office for a while, alone with the city outside the window. He texted Paula about the morning at Henderson. He texted Ray Kowalczyk. "Story's going to move fast. If your client gets pressured for corroboration, tell them to wait 48 hours. Ray replied in 4 minutes. "Understood. What are you building?" Nathan replied, "A case." Ray, "Need anything?" Nathan sat with that for a moment, then, maybe. I'll know tomorrow. He put the phone in his pocket and thought about James Calloway and his house in Kenilworth, and what it would take to sit across from a 22-year board member and lay out in plain terms what had been built inside his company over 18 months by someone he'd known for longer than that. The answer was everything they had, presented honestly, without overselling, and without omission. The same way you briefed any operation, not the version that made you look better than you were, the actual version, with the gaps admitted and the uncertainties named. He'd learned a long time ago that the briefings that tried to hide their own weaknesses were the ones that fell apart under pressure, and that the briefings that named their weaknesses first were the ones that got believed. He went back to the conference room and worked until midnight. There was a moment around 11 when Francis was walking Howard Wren through the acquisition account structure for the third time, and Pruitt was reviewing his written statement for accuracy, and Beatrice was on the phone again in the corner, speaking in a low voice to someone Nathan couldn't identify, when Amelia sat down in the chair next to him and didn't say anything for a moment, and he didn't say anything either. And they just sat there, side by side, in the organized chaos of it. Two people in the middle of something large looking at all the pieces of it spread across a conference table. "How are you doing?" he asked. Not the professional version of the question, the actual version. She took a breath. "I'm scared," she said, quietly, like it was something she'd been keeping back and had decided briefly to put down. Not about the company, about being wrong about people I trusted. She didn't look at him. "David Park, Garrett. I wonder what else I've been wrong about that I haven't found yet." He thought about the right response and discarded 3 of them before settling on. "You found the financial irregularities. You went to the right external auditor. You trusted the right people in your security detail. You made a decision about me in a parking garage based on evidence rather than resume." He paused. "Your ratio's pretty good." She looked at him sideways. "That's a very analytical way to comfort someone." "I'm a very analytical person." "You're really not, though," she said, and she said it gently, like she was giving him something back. "You're something else, and you use analytical language to keep people from seeing it." He didn't answer that. He wasn't sure he could answer that honestly without getting into territory he wasn't ready to be in at 11 o'clock at night in a conference room 60 hours before a board vote that would decide more than just a company. "Get some sleep tonight," he said instead. "Tomorrow is long." "Are you going to sleep?" "Some," he said. It was approximately true. She stood up and went back to the table. He watched her step back into the work, picking up a document, asking Francis a question, taking a note. With the same quality of focus she'd had since the first day he walked into the interview room, the thing that had made him think she was worth being honest with. It hadn't changed. 18 months of someone systematically undermining her, and it had not changed. That was not nothing. That was in fact the thing that was going to matter most in the next 60 hours. Not the documents, not the testimony, not the device records or the financial chain of custody. Those were tools. What was going to matter was whether the people in that boardroom on Monday believed that the woman standing in front of them was actually who she appeared to be. He thought she was. He'd thought so since the parking garage, and he'd learned to trust the judgment that came from watching people under pressure because pressure was the only condition that showed you what was actually there. Comfortable circumstances revealed nothing. It was the bad mornings and the cold clearings, and the moments when the obvious safe choice was available and someone chose differently that told you who you were actually dealing with. She'd chosen differently at every turn. So had he. And here they were. He packed up what he needed and said goodnight to Carol and nodded to Diaz and drove back to Pilsen in the Accord with the city quiet around him at midnight. He checked on Lily, asleep, the white noise machine doing its work, one arm thrown out to the side in the boneless way of children who had never learned to be tense while sleeping. He stood in her doorway for a minute. He thought about the man at the school fence with the camera, about what they'd been willing to use to control him. He felt the anger about it again, the same anger he'd named in the diner on Randolph. Not hot, not wild, but deep and fixed, the kind that didn't go anywhere and didn't need to be managed, just acknowledged. He went to bed. He slept for 3.5 hours, which was more than he'd expected. At 5 a.m., he was at the kitchen table with coffee and his legal pad, going through everything one more time, building the structure of what they would say to James Calloway at 8 o'clock in a house in Kenilworth, while 60 hours ran down and the board vote waited at the end of them like something that had always been there, like a destination that the whole story had been moving toward since a morning 4 weeks ago when a man in a pressed shirt crouched beside a limousine in an underground garage and found a thing everyone else had missed. He went over it until he knew it the way he knew routes. Cold, complete, every turn memorized. Then he got dressed, checked the Accord's fluids, habit, and drove to pick up Amelia Sterling. The morning was dark and very cold, the kind of cold that felt like a held breath, the city still and waiting. He drove north through empty streets and thought about what the next 2 days would require, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something that wasn't quite certainty, but was its neighbor. The feeling that came when you had done everything you could do to prepare, and the preparation was enough, not more than enough, not guaranteed, but enough. He drove. The city moved past the windows. He had somewhere to be. James Calloway opened his own front door. That was the first thing Nathan noticed. A man with 22 years on the board of one of Chicago's largest corporations, a house in Kenilworth that sat back from the lake road behind a line of old oaks, a net worth that Nathan had no interest in estimating. And he opened his own front door at 7:58 in the morning in a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, holding a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Fisherman" in faded letters. And he looked at Amelia and then at Nathan with the measured attention of someone who had been reading people for a very long time. "You look terrible," he said to Amelia. "Good morning, James," she said. "Come in." He stepped back. "Both of you." The house was old in a way that money sometimes allowed things to be old. Not neglected, but unhurried, full of furniture that had been bought to last and had lasted and hadn't been replaced because replacement wasn't the point. Bookshelves on every wall of the study he led them to, actual books with cracked spines, a desk covered in papers that had the organized chaos of genuine use rather than display. He sat behind the desk, and they sat across from him, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then Calloway said, "The financial press story." "Fabricated," Amelia said. "Constructed over approximately 18 months using forged authorization signatures, compromised internal systems, and a coordinated effort involving my COO, 2 board members, my head of security, and my general counsel." Calloway was quiet. He looked at his coffee mug for a moment. "David Park." "Yes." Something moved across his face that Nathan couldn't fully name. Not surprise, more like the specific sadness of a man who has lived long enough to have been wrong about people before and knows what that feels like in the body. "I've known David Park for 16 years, he said. "I know," Amelia said. "I've known him for 18 months, and I thought—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter what I thought. What matters is what I can show you." Nathan put the document package on the desk. It had taken Carol Vance until 2 in the morning to assemble it into the form it was in now. Indexed, tabbed, every piece cross-referenced to its source, authentication certificates from Francis attached to the financial documents, chain of custody records for the device data, Pruitt's formal statement with his signature and the USB drive's contents printed and certified. Carol had done it with the focused ferocity of someone who understood that the difference between compelling and courtroom ready was the kind of detail that kept you up until 2 a.m., and she had not complained once. Calloway looked at it for 40 minutes. He read slowly, which Nathan respected. He asked 4 questions, all of them precise, none of them the kind of question that was really a statement in disguise. When he finished, he took his reading glasses off and set them on the desk and sat back in his chair. "The vote is Monday," he said. "Yes," Amelia said. "Strand and Whitmore will have the suspension motion on the floor before 9 a.m. "Yes." "And you want to come in through the front door," he said. It wasn't a question. He was reading her the same way he'd been reading her since the front door, and Nathan had the impression that James Calloway had been reading Amelia Sterling for the full 18 months she'd been running the company, and had formed opinions he'd been keeping to himself. "I'm not hiding," Amelia said. "I've done nothing that requires hiding." "No," Calloway said. "You haven't." He picked up the coffee mug, looked at it without drinking. "Your father used to do something that drove me insane. When he was certain he was right, absolutely certain, He'd get quiet, not aggressive, not loud, just very, very quiet. He set the mug down. You've been doing that for 3 weeks. I noticed. I didn't know what to make of it. He looked at Nathan. Who are you exactly? Carol said security. Driver, Nathan said. Calloway looked at him for a moment. Driver, he repeated, with the careful neutrality of a man who had just read 40 pages of documentation assembled by a driver and was updating his understanding of what that word meant in this context. Former military? Yes, sir. What branch? Navy. What kind of Navy? Nathan met his gaze. The kind that's relevant to why this documentation is as complete as it is. Calloway considered that. Then he almost smiled, just briefly, just at the corner of his mouth. Fair enough. He looked back at Amelia. You have 7 votes? Beatrice is certain of 5. Herself, Chen, Moorfield, Abramowitz, and Tanaka. She thinks Dubois is movable, but not confirmed. Dubois is not movable by Beatrice, Calloway said with the confidence of someone who knew the specific social dynamics of 22 years of board relationships. Dubois needs to be moved by someone who doesn't feel like the opposition camp. He paused. I'll speak to Dubois this morning. Amelia looked at him. You're the 7th vote. I'm the 7th vote, he said simply. I was always going to be the 7th vote if you came to me with something real. What I needed to know was whether you were going to come to me with something real or whether you were going to run. He picked up the document package and squared it against the desk. You came to me with something real, and you brought the person who built it. He looked at Nathan again. Which tells me something about your judgment that the last 18 months haven't always made obvious. He stood. They stood. He extended his hand to Amelia, who shook it, and then to Nathan, who shook it. Monday morning, he said. Be in that room before 9. Don't go in the side door. I wasn't planning to, Amelia said. I know. I just wanted to say it. He walked them to the front door and opened it onto the cold morning, the oaks above the road bare against a sky that was finally, for the first time in a week, showing some pale blue at the edges. Get some rest this weekend if you can. You sound like him, Amelia said. I'll take that as a compliment, Calloway said. Drive safely. He looked at Nathan when he said it, which Nathan understood was not incidental. They walked to the Accord. Nathan started the engine and sat for a moment before pulling out, running through the next 48 hours the way he always ran through routes. Forward, backward, every variation. He'd asked Paula to maintain the school watch through Monday. He'd sent Ray Kowalczyk a message that morning asking him to be reachable. Diaz was meeting them at Carol's office at noon to go through security arrangements for Monday's board meeting. All of it was as assembled as he could make it with what he had. 7 votes, Amelia said from the passenger seat. 8 if Calloway gets to Dubois. He'll get to Dubois. She was looking out the window at the Kenilworth Street, the quiet Saturday morning of a wealthy suburb, a woman walking a retriever, someone putting out a recycling bin. Ordinary life, right at the edge of something that was anything but. How are you feeling? She asked. He thought about the honest answer. Cautious, he said. We have what we have. That's enough to tell the truth. It's not enough to guarantee the truth lands the way it should. That's always true. Yes, he said, it is. He pulled out and drove south, back toward the city. The weekend moved in a way that felt both very slow and very fast, the specific temporal distortion of waiting for something large. Nathan drove Amelia to Carol's office on Saturday afternoon and stayed through a session that went until 8 in the evening, working through the presentation sequence for Monday. What got said first? What got shown when? How to move through the evidence in a way that built rather than overwhelmed. How to anticipate the specific objections that Strand and Whitmore would raise and have the answers ready before the objections finished landing. He drove her to the hotel where she was staying. Not her apartment, which had not been formally cleared of surveillance concerns, a hotel that Carol had booked under a different name, and then drove to Pilsen and picked up Lily from the neighbor who had been watching her since Thursday and sat with her at the kitchen table while she showed him a drawing she'd made at school that day. It was a drawing of a car, a very long car, with a tiny figure driving it. That's you, Lily said, pointing at the driver. I can tell. he said. "The hat. You don't wear a hat." "The drawing me wears a hat." "Drawing you is more stylish," she said with complete seriousness. And he looked at her small face bent over the drawing and felt something that had no clean name, something adjacent to gratitude but larger than that and heavier. The feeling of understanding how close things had come to being different and how much the difference would have cost. "Come here," he said. She climbed into his lap without asking why, because she never asked why with him, and he held her for a while at the kitchen table with the radiator knocking in the walls and the drawing of the long car with the stylish driver on the table in front of them. He thought about the man at the school fence. He thought about the phone call that had used her name, her school, her dismissal time, as if she were a coordinate on a map. He thought about the people who had done that, not with rage, which was an indulgence he couldn't afford right now, but with the cold, specific clarity that came from deciding something was not going to be allowed to stand. 2 more days. Sunday was logistics and preparation and a long phone call with Ray that ran through contingency scenarios in the shorthand of 2 people who had a shared vocabulary for how things went wrong. He and Diaz went through the building layout of Sterling Meridian's 43rd floor, where the board meeting would be held, identifying every access point and every variable they couldn't control. He drove the route from the hotel to the building twice in the Accord, checking timing, checking sight lines, noting the position of every camera he could see. He was not expecting another attempt. The story was now public. The counter-evidence was assembled, and whoever was advising Marcus Hale had presumably told him that physical action at this point would collapse whatever legal deniability he was still trying to maintain, but expecting was different from accounting for. He slept 5 hours Sunday night and was up at 4:30. At 6 a.m., he was outside the hotel. Amelia came through the lobby at 6:15, Carol Vance beside her, both of them carrying the document cases that contained everything. Diaz came around from the north side of the building where she'd been since 5:30. They loaded into the Accord, not the limousine which Nathan had left in the Sterling Meridian garage and not touched since Thursday, and drove through the early Monday streets of Chicago, gray and cold and very quiet, the city not yet fully itself. Nobody said much. There was a particular kind of silence that settled over people before something large, and this was that silence. Nathan drove through it and let it be what it was. They arrived at Sterling Meridian at 7:45. The building was already active, lobby security on full rotation, a small cluster of people near the elevators who Nathan clocked as a mix of legal staff and the specific body language of people who had been working through the weekend on something adversarial. He recognized one of them as counsel for Philip Strand, which meant Strand was already running his own parallel preparation upstairs. Nathan went in through the main entrance. Front door, all 4 of them. The lobby security guard who checked credentials did a slight double take when he saw Amelia, and Nathan watched him make the micro decision to say nothing and let them through, which was the correct decision. They went to the elevators. 43rd floor. The doors opened onto the executive level, and the first person they saw was Robert Hale, standing near the reception desk with his phone in his hand and an expression that went through several visible stages in the span of about 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been the beginning of fear, and then a studied blankness that didn't quite cover any of the things underneath. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "we weren't expecting—" "I'm aware," Amelia said, and walked past him. Nathan followed her, and as he passed Robert Hale, he met the man's eyes briefly, just briefly, and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say, and Robert Hale looked away first. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. They were 40 minutes early, which was the point. Beatrice Okafor was already in the boardroom, along with Howard Wren, who had apparently been there since 8, and a woman Nathan didn't recognize who turned out to be an attorney from the Illinois State Attorney's Office. Amelia had made a call on Sunday morning that Nathan hadn't known about, and the call had apparently produced results. Calloway arrived at 8:30, and behind him, looking slightly rumpled and slightly sheepish in the specific way of a man who has recently been convinced to do something that cost him sleep, came a heavy-set man Nathan recognized from the board photographs he'd studied. Dubois. 8 votes. At 8:55, Philip Strand and Connie Whitmore arrived. They came in together with their counsel, and when they saw Amelia sitting at the head of the table, her chair, the chair she always occupied, The chair she had occupied for 18 months without anyone formally telling her it was hers because it was simply understood. Strand's face did something complicated. He was a man in his mid-60s who had spent most of those years being the most certain person in any room he entered, and certainty was clearly not what he was feeling right now. "Miss Sterling," he said, "I wasn't informed you'd be present." "It's my board meeting, Philip," she said. "Sit down." Marcus Hale was not in the room. Nathan had noted his absence before the meeting started and spent a moment wondering where he was, and then Diaz appeared at his elbow and said quietly, "He's downstairs. His attorney showed up at 8:20. I think they know." "Know what specifically?" "That it's over," Diaz said. The meeting was not a clean thing. Clean was for movies and memory. The actual event was messy and argumentative and twice went sideways into procedural disputes about the order of presentation that Carol had to navigate with the patience of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had the specific immunity to chaos that experience produced. Strand interrupted 4 times in the first 20 minutes. Whitmore said almost nothing, which Nathan read as someone who had already consulted their own legal counsel and received advice about the wisdom of speaking on record. But the evidence was what it was. Francis walked the financial chain through with the methodical precision of someone who had been doing forensic accounting since before Philip Strand had his first board seat. And she did not rush and she did not hedge, and when Strand's counsel tried to challenge the authentication methodology, she produced the certification documents and the opposing argument stopped mid-sentence. Gerald Pruitt's testimony was read into the record by Carol. Pruitt himself was not present, for reasons of his ongoing cooperation with the state attorney's office. But his statement was complete and signed, and the USB drive evidence had been formally submitted. The device records showing Garrett's calls to Marcus Hale's personal cell were presented by the independent attorney from the state attorney's office, who made clear without unnecessary drama that the evidence was part of an ongoing investigation that had been formally opened as of Saturday morning, and that several individuals connected to the events described were expected to be contacted in the coming days. Strand went very quiet after that. Nathan sat against the wall through all of it. Not at the table, he had no seat at the table and hadn't expected one, but visible, which was what he'd understood Amelia needed him to be. Present, accountable, the person who could be pointed to when the question arose, as it inevitably did, of how any of this had come to light. Calloway asked that question directly, around 10:15. He looked at Amelia and said, "For the record, how was this investigation initiated?" Amelia looked at Nathan. "My driver noticed something during his first vehicle inspection," she said. "A tampered brake line. He reported it to me directly instead of through channels, which turned out to be the correct decision because the channels had been compromised." She paused. "Everything that followed came from that decision." Calloway looked at Nathan for a moment. "A brake line," he said. "Yes, sir," Nathan said. "And from that you built." He gestured at the evidence package on the table. "From that I paid attention," Nathan said. "That's all it was." The room was quiet for a moment. Even Strand didn't say anything. The vote on the suspension motion came at 11:07. 8 against, 2 in favor. Strand and Whitmore voted for their own motion and were the only ones who did. Strand's counsel had a brief private conversation with him immediately after the vote count, and then Strand said, with the specific stiffness of a man choosing each word for reasons his attorney had explained, that he had no further comments at this time and needed to step out. He did not come back. Whitmore stayed for another 40 minutes. Through the motion Beatrice brought immediately after, a formal board resolution initiating an independent investigation into the misconduct described in the evidence package, with oversight by the state attorney's office. It passed 9-1. Whitmore voted against it and then left, and her attorney left with her, and the door closed behind them and the room felt different. Amelia sat at the head of the table, and for a moment she didn't speak, and nobody spoke to her. Nathan watched her face, which was doing several things at once, processing, recalibrating, something underneath that was not quite relief. Because relief implied the fear was over, and the fear was not entirely over. There was still work to be done. There would be weeks of investigation and legal proceedings, and the business of cleaning out everything that had been built against her over 18 months. She knew that. She was already thinking about it. But for one moment, just one, he saw it. Something that let go. Some held thing that had been held for a very long time finally setting down. Howard Wren, from his end of the table, said quietly, "Well done, Ms. Sterling." She nodded once. "Thank you, Howard." Then she looked at Nathan, and she didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything. And it was the clearest communication that had passed between them since the beginning. He drove her home that afternoon. Not the hotel. Her actual apartment, which had been swept and cleared by a team Paula recommended, the monitoring software fully removed from her phone, and her building systems audited by Gerald Pruitt, who had emerged from the Rosemont Motel as a cooperating witness and seemed to be standing slightly straighter for having made that decision. The Accord moved through Monday afternoon traffic, the city in its normal rhythms, indifferent to the things that had happened inside it over the past month. And Amelia sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window and was quiet. "Garrett?" she said at one point. "Interviewed by the state attorney's office this morning," Nathan said. "Paula heard from her contact. He's cooperating." "Marcus?" "His attorney filed formal representation at noon. They're negotiating terms." He paused. "It'll take a while. These things take a while." "David Park?" He heard the specific weight she put on that name versus the others. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "That one will depend on what he decides to do." She nodded. Was quiet again. Then, "Robert Hale." "Suspended pending investigation. He went home at noon." She looked at her hands. "He didn't know," she said, "about the brake line, about the kidnapping plan. I think Robert is someone who got pulled further than he meant to go because he loves his brother and wasn't willing to ask the question that would have made him choose." She paused. "That's not an excuse. But it's what I think." "It might matter to investigators," Nathan said. "It might not." "I know." She turned back to the window. "I keep thinking about the brake line, the day you interviewed. If you had gotten in that car and driven it—" "I didn't. But you almost didn't say anything. You almost just reported it through normal channels and let someone else deal with it." He thought about that. "No," he said. "I didn't almost do that. I knew from the moment I found it that I was taking it directly to you. I just didn't know yet whether you were the kind of person who would actually listen." She was quiet for a moment. "And you came down to the garage and looked at it yourself." She almost laughed. Not quite. Too much in the way, but almost. A very low bar. "You'd be surprised," he said. He pulled up to her building. The doorman came to the curb, and Amelia gathered her things. The portfolio, the coat, the accumulated weight of a Monday that had been years in its making and hours in its execution. She got out and then stopped with the door open and looked back in at him. "Nathan," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't yes, ma'am me right now." He looked at her. "Okay. I'm going to offer you a position," she said. "Formally, through the company, with a real title and real compensation and a scope of work that matches what you actually did rather than what you were hired to do." She paused. "Director of Executive Security. I need someone in that role who I know is actually doing the job and not the version of the job that's been constructed to make someone else comfortable." He didn't answer immediately. She waited, which he appreciated. She'd learned that he sometimes needed a moment to answer the actual question rather than the first version of it. "I'm going to say no," he said. She didn't look surprised. "Why?" "Because I'm not built for an office," he said. "Because Lily needs me in a way that's different from what a full-time executive security role requires. And because—" he paused, trying to find the honest version. "Because I went into that interview 4 weeks ago needing a job, and I came out of it needing something else, and I haven't finished figuring out what that is yet. And I'd rather figure it out clearly than take a position that's being offered out of gratitude and have us both pretend it's something else." She looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was flat and cold, the city doing its city thing around them, indifferent and continuous. "That's honest," she said. "Trying to be." "Independent consultant," she said. "Your terms, your availability, your scope. We contract when we need each other, and we don't when we don't." He thought about it. "That I can do." She nodded, started to turn, then didn't. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Your wife," she said. "You've never mentioned her name." He was quiet for a moment. "Claire," he said. "How long?" "2 years in March." "What happened if—" "Aneurysm," he said. No warning. She was making coffee. He looked at the steering wheel. Lily was 4. She doesn't remember her the way I need her to remember her, which is something I'm working on, finding ways to keep her present. He paused. "That's probably more than you were asking for." "It's not," Amelia said. "It's exactly what I was asking for." He looked up at her. The afternoon light was doing something to her expression that made it more readable than usual. Or maybe he just knew her better than he had 4 weeks ago, which was likely true. She looked like someone who was choosing to see a person clearly, which was harder than it sounded and more rare than it should be. "Thank you," she said, "for Lily's name, for the school, for the morning at the diner and the clearing and the construction zone, and all the parts of this I don't know about yet." She held his gaze. "For finding the brake line." "It was a job," he said. "No, it wasn't," she said. "You told me that yourself." And she closed the door and walked into her building, and the doorman held the door, and she went through it without looking back, which was the right thing to do because looking back would have made it into something sentimental that it didn't need to be. He sat in the Accord for a minute. Just a minute. The traffic moved around him and the city breathed its Monday afternoon breath. And somewhere across town, Lily was in a classroom learning something about dolphins or mathematics or the specific social hierarchies of first grade, and the radiator in his apartment was waiting to knock at 2 a.m., and the legal pad on his kitchen table still had 4 weeks of notes on it that he'd need to decide what to do with. He thought about Claire making coffee. He thought about how some mornings he still reached for his phone to tell her something. The brake line, the tracking device. The moment in the clearing when Amelia had looked at the document spread on the hood and said, "We're going to do this," and then remembered and put the phone down. The remembering never got easier. He didn't think it was supposed to. What he'd learned in the 2 years since March was that the things you did in the gap, the space between who you were before and whoever you were becoming, mattered. Not in some abstract way, concretely. The decisions you made when you were sad and tired and didn't know what you were building, those were the ones that turned out to matter most. Because they were the ones made without the comfort of a clear destination, made only from whatever was actually in you when everything else was stripped back. He'd found a brake line. He'd said something about it. He'd sat in a diner with bad coffee and told the truth to a woman who knew how to listen to it. He'd driven a maintenance road he'd memorized for no reason, except that he liked to know where things went. He'd stood in a church parking lot in Rogers Park with his hazards off, in a car that didn't belong to him, in a situation he could have walked away from at any of 20 different points, and he had not walked away. Not because he was a hero, not because it was destiny or purpose or anything that large, because someone was going to get hurt, and he was there, and he knew how to help. That was all. That had always been all. He started the Accord. He drove to Henderson Elementary and parked down the block from the entrance where Paula's car was still positioned, and he texted Paula, standing down, "Thank you." Paula texted back, "Invoice coming? Tell your girl I said hi." He texted back, "She's never met you." Paula, "She will eventually." He put the phone away. He waited. At 3:15, the doors opened and the kids came out in the specific joyful chaos of children released from containment, and he saw the yellow hat from half a block away, bobbing through the crowd with the particular energy of a 6-year-old who had been sitting still for 7 hours and was done with that now. He got out of the car. Lily spotted him before he'd taken 3 steps and came at him at full speed, her backpack bouncing, her yellow hat slightly sideways, her face doing the thing it did when she saw him after a long stretch of not seeing him, open and uncomplicated and entirely sure of itself. The face of someone who had not yet learned to manage her own expressions. He caught her, and she grabbed around his neck, and he held her weight and smelled the specific smell of her, crayons and something sweet from lunch, and stood on the sidewalk outside Henderson Elementary on a cold Monday in November with his daughter in his arms and the crisis behind him and the rest of it still ahead, still unresolved, still being figured out one day at a time. "Did you drive the big car today?" she asked against his shoulder. "No," he said. "I drove our car." "Did anything happen?" He thought about 43 floors of glass and steel and a board meeting and a vote of 8-2 and a woman who had come to a diner in her own neighborhood so nobody would recognize her and who had stood in a cold clearing in a silver emergency blanket and said, "We're going to do this with the flat." Certainty of someone who had decided to stop being afraid and start being useful. "A little bit," he said. "Good stuff or bad stuff?" He set her down and took her hand and started walking toward the car. "Both," he said. The good stuff was bigger. She considered this with the seriousness she gave to things that mattered. "Okay," she said, and swung his hand once, the way she did, and they walked to the Accord, and he buckled her in and got in the driver's seat and started the engine. Months passed in the way that months passed after something large, not cleanly, not in a straight line, but in the accumulative way of time doing its work regardless of whether you were ready for it. The investigation ran through winter and into spring, producing results that were thorough and in places worse than anyone had anticipated. Marcus Hale was indicted on 14 counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and securities manipulation. Garrett cooperated extensively with prosecutors, and his cooperation produced results that dismantled the Red Line Security Group operation and connected it to 2 other corporate surveillance cases in other cities. Philip Strand and Connie Whitmore resigned from the board in December, and their legal difficulties would occupy them for the foreseeable future. David Park entered into a cooperation agreement in January that his attorney negotiated carefully, and that Amelia, when asked by the press if she had a comment, declined to address publicly, which Nathan thought was the right call for reasons he didn't need to explain. Gerald Pruitt was reinstated to his position in April with a formal commendation from the board and a title adjustment that came with a significant raise. He sent Nathan a text when it was official that said only, "Thank you for coming to that motel." Nathan replied, "You made the right call." Pruitt, "Eventually." Nathan, "That counts." Robert Hale was not indicted. He resigned in February, and Nathan heard through Diaz that he was working for a smaller firm on the north side, something in property management, and that he had not spoken to his brother since December. Nathan didn't know what to do with that information and eventually stopped trying to figure it out. Diaz was offered a position as head of Amelia's rebuilt security team and took it. She was good at it in a way that didn't require Nathan to worry, which was the only thing he asked of the people responsible for keeping Amelia Sterling safe. Nathan consulted. That was the word for what he did, which covered a range of things that included 2 security assessments for Sterling Meridian's new executive protocols, a training session for the rebuilt security team that Diaz specifically requested and that ran for 3 days and was, by any measure, more rigorous than anyone had anticipated, and several conversations with Amelia that began as professional consultations and ended as something harder to categorize. He drove her to a board meeting in March in the Accord because the limousine was in for maintenance, and she'd texted him at 7 a.m. with cars broken. "Can you drive me in the flat, unadorned way?" She communicated things that were requests but were phrased as statements. He drove her. They talked on the way there about Lily, who had recently developed an opinion about the Accord's radio stations that she expressed with considerable confidence. They talked about the investigation and its grinding progress. They talked about a security protocol Nathan had drafted for her travel arrangements going forward, and she had specific notes on it that were good notes, the kind that came from someone who had been paying attention to her own vulnerabilities in a new way. They didn't talk about everything. Some things were still being worked out. That was fine. Things got worked out in the time they needed to get worked out, and Nathan had learned enough in 32 years to know that trying to accelerate that process was how you ruined it. The day that felt like an ending, though endings were never really singular things, came in April. A Saturday. The investigation had produced its first major conviction. Marcus Hale's plea agreement, announced on a Thursday, had resolved 14 counts and produced a result that Amelia's legal team described as comprehensive. The financial fraud had been formally attributed to its actual authors. The forged signatures on the acquisition documents had been legally established as forgeries. Amelia's position was, in the language of the board resolution passed unanimously in February, formally affirmed, and the misconduct allegations formally retracted. She texted him on Saturday morning, "Are you free today?" He was helping Lily with a project involving an implausible quantity of paper mache, But Lily released him from this obligation with the magnanimity of someone who understood that adults sometimes had places to be, and also that the paper mache required drying time anyway. Amelia met him outside her building in jeans and a coat, which was the most casual he'd ever seen her, and she had car keys in her hand. Not the limousine keys, something else. "I have my father's old sedan," she said. "I've been meaning to drive it for 6 months, and I never do, and today feels like the day." The car was a 1987 Mercedes 300D, navy blue, maintained with the care of someone who had understood what it meant to keep a thing alive. It ran cleanly. Nathan noticed this immediately, the specific way a well-maintained older engine settled into itself at idle. "You want me to drive?" he asked. "Please." He drove. They went north along the lake, the April sun doing something tentative on the water, the kind of early spring day that promised warmth without fully delivering it, still cold at the edges but trying. She sat in the passenger seat and looked out at the water, and he drove the way he always drove. Both hands, eyes working, aware of the road and the traffic and the specific quality of the morning around them. They didn't talk for a while. The radio was off. The old engine made its contented diesel sound. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said eventually. "At the hotel, when you turned down the position." "Okay." "You said you hadn't finished figuring out what you needed." She looked at the water. "Have you made progress on that?" He thought about it honestly. "Some," he said. "I know I need to be where Lily is. I know I'm not done consulting, but I'm not only that. I'm starting to understand that I'm not only that." "What else are you?" He thought about Claire's coffee cup still in the cabinet because he hadn't been able to move it and had eventually stopped trying. He thought about the legal pad with the 4 weeks of notes, which he'd kept because it turned out he couldn't throw away things that had mattered. He thought about Lily's drawing of the long car with the driver in a hat, which was now on the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like a fish. "I'm figuring it out," he said. "That's the most honest answer I have." She nodded, looked back out the window at the lake moving past. "That's a good answer," she said. "I think that's actually the correct answer for most people most of the time, and everyone's just pretending otherwise." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." The road curved north, and the city fell behind, and the lake was wide and gray-green and moving, the way it always moved regardless of what was happening on its edges, constant and indifferent, and somehow, for that reason, steadying. Nathan drove, and the old engine ran clean, and the morning opened up around them, and there was nothing complicated about any of it for a little while. That was enough. More than enough. He drove.